I'm Pat Thatcher.
And I'm Margaret Gifford, and we're from Sotheby's International Realty.
And you know, Margaret, I think the word that best describes this real estate market this year is opportunistic.
I think that's a great word to describe what the real estate market's doing now.
I think it is also, and that says if you're a seller, by golly, get your house ready correctly.
And if you're a buyer, do your homework.
So if you want to be part of this opportunistic real estate market,
jump on that horse.
Carlson Printing for all your printing needs. 508-548-7303 or toll free at 1-800-696-7303. Our email address is carlsonprinting@aol.com. Carlson Printing for all your printing needs.
Hosting services for fctv.org are provided by MegaNet Communications. MegaNet offers a wide array of internet services including Mega Backup Cloud Service, server colocation, T1, fiber, Metro Ethernet, as well as telephone services such as hosted PBX and digital voice. Their number one goal is to keep your communications network up and running and allow you to focus on growing your business. 877-634-2638 or meganet.net.
Welcome, everyone. This is the October 15, 2018 Board of Selectmen's meeting. Our first item is a call to order and then Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. No proclamations this evening. Recognition, Ms. Braga?
Yes, just really happy to report the final numbers aren't in, but the Kerwin-Murray Bike Ride, the second annual Kerwin-Murray Bike Ride was held on Sunday of this past weekend. And by all accounts, they nearly doubled in terms of what they raised for funds for Falmouth Housing Corporation. And so this is a bike ride in memory of Bob Murray, who of course was really integral to affordable housing here in this town, and Peter Kerwin, who really dedicated many decades here to the town, looking after some of the most vulnerable of our families and neighbors. And so this bike ride that was put together last year by Zelda McGregor and Matt Patrick. I think, I don't have the final number, so don't quote me, but I think they raised somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000 this year. And that'll all go to Falmouth Housing Corporation to address some of the issues around housing for people in our town. A lot of individuals in the town volunteered, and a lot of businesses and individuals donated. So a huge thank you. This is just the second year, so I think there's only up from here, but these are the type of things that we like to recognize that really make a difference in the everyday lives of the people here in town.
That's great, very important. Next is announcements. I do want to let everyone know that on October 25th at the Falmouth Library, we'll be having another presentation listening session with respect to the Route 28 road project. So look forward to having you and seeing you there. Julian, do you know what time that's going to be?
6 to 7:30 p.m.
Great. Look forward to seeing everyone who's interested in that potential widening project. Any other announcements, Sam?
Yes, in the vein of housing, just so everybody knows, there's a community housing forum tomorrow, Tuesday, October 16th at 6:30. It's at the Falmouth Public Library Herman Foundation Meeting Room. And it actually is a look at the draft housing production plan, which the town will be considering adopting. So it's tomorrow night at 6:30.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Pardon me, just another reminder that the Selectmen will be, of course, hosting a dedication ceremony for the recently completed water filtration facility at 5 p.m. Tomorrow. That's Tuesday, October 16th at 650 Gifford Street, and that is open to the public, and we look forward to that ceremony unfolding. Thank you.
Great. Any other announcements?
That was what you had done.
Oh, good, okay.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you. Next, we have on the agenda public comment. It's an opportunity for anyone here to speak on an item that is not on the agenda. It's 2 minutes per person, a total of 10 minutes for that section of the agenda. And please have a welcome.
Good evening. My name is Richard Latimer. I'm a lawyer, but I'm here tonight as a private citizen concerned about the application of the bylaw that would impose a requirement that persons who work in secondhand shops.
Mr. Latimer, that's an item on the agenda. I'm going to give time for you then, if you don't mind just letting us get to that point. We're gonna hear you at the point in the agenda for that item.
Oh, okay.
If you wouldn't mind, because I know you.
I thought you were asking for.
No, this section of the agenda is just for items that are not on the agenda. I want to stick to that, but I will give you time later. Thank you. Next. And this is for an item not on the agenda. Also not on the same issue that Mr. Latimer.
My name is Carol Murphy. I'm a Falmouth Town meeting member. I would like to know why there was an adequate notice given for this fee hearing, that it is in violation.
We'll hear Mr. Latimer at that point in the
But of the
agenda.
open meeting law, of
This
the open
is-
meeting law.
Thank you. We're going to be talking about your complaint when the item comes up. Okay, is there anyone else on an item that is not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move ahead. The first item under summary of actions is licenses. Whether to approve an application for 8 special one-day all-alcohol liquor licenses, Falmouth Theater Guild, Highfield Theater, 58 Highfield Drive, November 2 to 3, 9 to 11, and 16 to 18. And there is a note that this will be 28 out of 30 days, leaving 2 days for 2018.
I move approval.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have whether to approve an application for a special one-day wine and malt liquor license, EC Event Management, Touch a Truck fundraiser, Cape Cod Fairgrounds, for Sunday, October 28, 2018.
I move approval.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
I just have one
Please.
comment, just to point out that on the agenda, it's not clear who it's for, and just to point out, this is in support of the fight against ALS.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have on the agenda whether to approve a request to extend a seasonal all-alcohol common victual license until January 2, 2019. Landfall Restaurant, 9 Luscombe Avenue, Woods Hole.
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, under administrative orders, we have whether to vote to approve a grant of license to Rest a While LLC to maintain a stone wall along Old Dock Road at 3 Old Dock Road. Is the owner here by any chance? I just want to mention that I have an interest in an adjacent property. I don't think that that interest would prevent me from this vote. Mr. Suso, do you want to just tee that up?
Certainly, Madam Chair. We understand there was some construction on that corner parcel at the corner of Old Dock Road across from West Falmouth Market. There was some renovation of a residential, of a parcel there to a two-family residential. And as part of that, there was the construction of a stone wall on the perimeter of that property, adjacent to the Falmouth Road right-of-way. And we were contacted by the owner when we were replacing some sidewalk there along Old Dock Road with a concern raised that the town's construction had potentially damaged the stone wall which was constructed there. When we had a survey performed, it was determined that actually the newly constructed old stone wall encroached on the road right-of-way rather than the opposite. And when we notified the owner of that, this proposal came forward requesting that the board would grant a license allowing them to encroach on the road right-of-way. And as the board has seen, it's revocable and holds the town harmless if any activities such as plowing of streets or sidewalks would cause a problem for that stone wall because the encroachment, so that the town would not, would be held harmless. That is the proposal before you. It was reviewed by Town Council Frank Duffy, and Mr. Duffy is also available if there be questions for him.
Is there any questions or discussion from the board?
No, I think it makes sense. It's nice work that makes the area look more attractive. I think it's a good solution. I'd move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next item on the agenda is whether to vote to approve a water main easement for the Cape Club off Falmouth Woods Road.
I would move approval.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next, we have whether to vote to approve payment from the Recreational Department donation account in the amount of $738.78 to Anthem Sports for volleyball equipment.
I move approval.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have whether to approve the warrant for a state election on Tuesday, November 6, 2018.
I would move approval, but I just wanted to make one comment on the 3 questions. They're as confusing questions as I've ever dealt with in a referendum. I would just encourage everyone to vote, but before they vote, to read about the questions so they know how they're voting. In particular, there's one where a yes vote is actually repealing a current law, and typically yes votes are talking about imposing new laws opposed to about getting rid of old laws, and so I'm not telling people how to vote, but read the questions very carefully before you get to the ballot, to the voting booth.
Very good point.
I would
So-
second that.
Is, and all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next, we have whether to vote to accept a fiscal year 2018 Edward Byrne Grant, Department of Justice, funding in the amount of $11,312 for the police department to purchase 2 speed trailers and 52 body beacons. Okay, are there any questions from the board, or
What is a body beacon?
Mr. Suso?
We have,
I think
Chief-
he's doing something right now, Mr.
oh, Chief Dunn
Suso.
stepped away.
Yeah, I can just say from the
right ahead,
letter what
please.
it indicates, I'm not,
Yep.
I'm just reading this, so. But, that they're rechargeable LED lights that actually go on, during, patrol-related stops go on to, I guess, the officer, so that it increases visibility for people while they're doing stops. You know, we've had obviously the unfortunate incidents where people, oftentimes state troopers on the highway are hit when they're effectuating stops. So this makes another level of visibility. And I think they're gonna purchase 52 of those, and then 2 of the monitors, right?
Absolutely.
Good.
Is there a motion?
I move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have whether to vote to accept a donation from Priscilla Garrity of Rand Atlantic Inc., Cape Cod Realty, in the amount of $2,000 to the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund. I don't see Priscilla here, but that's a very generous
Move
gift.
approval with
Very
gratitude.
nice.
Yeah, that's great.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Next, we have a series of recurring recommended events. We have Jazztober, Arts Falmouth Inc. at Queens Byway and Main Street for Saturday, October 20, 2018, and Sunday, October 21, 2018. As I read these, if there's someone here from the organization, please raise your hand. I don't now. What's the board's pleasure?
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have Main Street Stroll, Holidays by the Sea. Falmouth Village Association and Falmouth Chamber of Commerce want to close Main Street from the Village Green to Shore Street Extension on Saturday, December 8, 2018.
One comment I'd make on this, I know that 2 years ago, we deliberated as to whether to do it, and Chief Dunn came back, and he was encouraging it very strongly. And standing out on the street with him last year, and how successful this event was, and it was a safe, wonderful time for people to go down the street. I wholeheartedly suggest that we continue with this. I know the businesses are very supportive of it also. So I would
Absolutely.
move approval.
Wonderfully successful
Second.
event. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'd like to see him close that street on all the weekends in the summer.
It's being discussed with the
Oh,
chamber.
really?
Yeah, I
Good.
think you'll see more of that.
Nice.
Next, we have the 6th Annual Jingle Jog and Seafaring Santa for the Falmouth Chamber of Commerce Band Shell and Marina Park on Saturday, December 8, 2018.
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And next, we have the 9th Annual Flag Day 5K.
I think we skipped the,
Oops, oh,
the
how
Christmas.
could I skip the Christmas parade? Sorry about that. The 55th Annual Christmas Parade, Falmouth Chamber of Commerce. The route will be Dillingham Ave to Davis Straits to Village Green via Main Street, Sunday, December 9, 2018.
Move approval.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
We had talked about giving them some guidance on the route so that they don't take up as much of Main Street and they,
Are you talking about for the marathon?
for the marathon.
I think we haven't done the 5K.
Okay,
Not
this is
quite
that,
5K.
that's
Not
right,
quite
that's
there
coming
yet,
up, yeah, okay.
Next, we have the 9th Annual Flag Day 5K, Rich Sherman, Falmouth Heights. The route will be east 1.5 miles, starting at 263 Grand Ave and back on Sunday, June 16, 2019.
Move approval.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have Falmouth 4th of July fireworks, the Falmouth Fireworks Committee, Falmouth Heights Beach and Ball Field on Thursday, July 4, 2019.
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And next, we have the Cape Cod Marathon Weekend, Jackafarian Falmouth Track Club, Saturday, October 26, 2019, and Sunday, October 27, 2019.
It says new route.
Yes,
But we don't.
it's going to showcase more of Falmouth's coastline.
Good.
But where will it begin on Sunday? That's the issue that came up with some of the neighbors that I have who are members of the Congregational Church.
I
think it's
see
right
It's
here.
starting
Is
at the
this it right here?
green.
I think it's right there. Let me just refresh my
This is
memory.
the five.
Yes.
This is the-
Mr. Suso, do you have,
At least they're closing the street from 7:30 to 8:45 from the west end of the Village Green to the Post Office Road for the start.
Oh, here it
Yeah,
is.
just, my suggestion is that they started at Lawrence and come along Hamlin to the to that pedestrian pathway, go by Library Lane, and then on out Walker Street, so that they're not actually taking up the parking space in the traffic areas around the churches on the green on a Sunday morning.
I think, Mr. Suso, has that specific issue been vetted with Mr. Afarian, or should we have him come back for that question?
You recall that, Peter? I do not.
I
So
know
what I,
that the
you know, what I
closing-
can tell you, and it's supported by the materials in the packet, is that the route was changed to make it less onerous on the police department, requiring less details.
Right?
It was reviewed favorably by the police department and the committee. So I can't speak with detailed knowledge of the precise route, other than, you know, what is contained. Do you have the map, Sam, that's in the packet?
It's only a partial map
It's a
of
time.
Merrimack
Would
and,
the chief mind speaking
down to
to this,
Worcester Court.
to the extent that you're familiar with the Jackafarian's Cape Cod Marathon, the new route? And the question came up about the start on the Village Green.
I believe it's still going to start on the Village Green. The new route will take effect next year.
Right.
And it's going to basically stay along the shore road. It won't be crossing 28 into East Falmouth, into North Falmouth, West Falmouth. I believe it will start at the Village Green, down Shore Street, and then out towards Central Ave, up Central Ave, make a turnaround, and then come back along the shore and back down towards Woods Hole, then spin around again and come back up onto Main Street where it normally ends. Similar, I think the start and finish, from what I understand, it's still being tweaked, but from the start and finish will be pretty much on Main Street again, like it had been in the past, from what I recall, my meeting with Mr. Farian.
That's what the paperwork looks like. It looks like there's going to be closings early
Pretty
in the
much going to
morning and
stay
then-
on this side of town, where now the marathon this year will run along the shore, up Davisville, cross 28, all around Old Meeting House, up to Sandwich Road, and all through Thomas Landers and everything else. And that has been a big strain on the police department, because we need well over 22 officers to run that, as well as the town. Road closures, there are really no road closures other than Main Street for the start and the finish. Everything else is open for runners and vehicles.
Now, the concern that a neighbor of mine raised with me is how much congestion there is on the town green that prohibits people from going to the churches.
We work with, I've done the marathon for the number of years I have, and we work with both St. Barnabas and the Congregational Church. As far as parking, there's no cars there, because that's where the runners stack in the morning, and they're gone. And usually while they're gone, seems to be when the masses are going on, and we get cars in and out, pedestrian, we make sure the church services go on without a hitch.
Okay.
There is no parking per se, and as far as the runners parking, they're well aware about the schools and things like that, and they don't take up spots on Main Street.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So in that case, is there a motion?
Move approval?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next, we have new recommended events. The first is Chris Weatherby 19th Annual Memorial Toy Run, fundraiser motorcycle ride, Tammy Baptiste. The route is Buzzards Bay to Carriage House Shelter, Old Main Road on Sunday, November 4, 2018.
I think some folks are
Is
here.
there a proponent here? Is there one of you who could just come up and introduce yourself and maybe answer any questions the board might have? Thank you. Would you introduce yourself?
Good evening. My name is Tammy Baptiste. I am one of the co-coordinators, as well as the daughter of the person who this ride is named of. It is the 19th year it's been done in my mother's memory. However, it's the 30th year that motorcycle enthusiasts have supported the children of the Housing Assistance Corporation that are in the shelters. I do have copies of our flyer as well as our tour route. If you all would like them, I
We
can
did
hand
get
them out.
that in our packet.
Okay.
We did, thank you.
Didn't get the route map. It said that the map was included, and I did not see a map in our packet.
It's not an actual map, it's a description, if I could.
Please.
Okay.
Pretty well spelled out. We go from Eagles
Good.
Hall and Buzzards Bay.
Right, I have that.
For speaking, you can, it has to pick up from the mic.
We have that, I didn't see what it
So I
says,
think
so,
we were
okay.
looking for an actual map, but
Yep.
if there isn't, we'll go with what we have. Thank
Okay.
you.
So the Toyne Run road directions, weather permitting, if it's inclement weather or it's rain, we're not gonna put the riders in jeopardy. We will take a shorter route, which is described at the top of the paper, showing that it goes from the Eagles Hall in Buzzards Bay down Main Street, over the bridge to the Otis Rotary, et cetera. The permanent normal route, which is the route we've used in previous years, up until they had begun the road construction on Route 28 with the road construction going on, we did alter the route for those years. It starts at the Eagles Hall in Buzzards Bay, comes over the bridge, comes down Route 28 to Palmer Avenue, Queens Byway, down Main Street to Sandwich Road, up Sandwich Road to Brick Kiln to 28A, 151 Old Main Road, and arrives at the Carriage House. That is what we would like to do again this year, and that is what we're before you to ask, so that we can continue supporting the children on Cape Cod, especially the ones here in Falmouth, and do the ride through town. Chief Dunn has graciously given us his support in this, and will do whatever he can to make it. We also, just so everybody is aware, will be announcing at the Eagles Hall where we have our registration, that as they come through town, they are to be on their best behavior and keep things down. We've
Thank
never
you.
had any incidents in the past, to my knowledge.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Well, I guess I would use this opportunity. Certainly, there are a lot of motorcyclists who are much louder than they are legally allowed to be. Is there any way you can guarantee that these motorcyclists will not?
I cannot guarantee that. However, I can, as I said, we will stress to them. Most of our enthusiasts are law-abiding, legal citizen, legally riding citizens whose motorcycles are inspected and up to state codes.
I think it'd be appropriate to have noise bylaws enforced during this. I mean, I hate to set up the idea of a trap as they come into town, but I've never heard a ride that is not loud, and louder than is legal.
Right.
I've never, ever heard a motorcycle.
When you get 100 or so motorcycles, yes, it does get loud, but we're only here for 15, 20 minutes as we ride through town.
At 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning.
No, it's not. We leave the Eagles Hall at 11 a.m., and we would be arriving in Falmouth about 11:30 a.m. And we would arrive at the Carriage House, where we deliver the toys and the monetary donations, approximately noontime.
Okay, the timing was a little bit unclear on because it was asking for the event from 8:30 to 12.
8:30 is when the registration starts in Buzzards Bay.
So actually, in the town of Falmouth, they will not be arriving in Falmouth till after 11:30.
Correct. That is our estimate, is between,
After 11.
after 11.
That's helpful, thank you. Any other questions?
I would move approval.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
I'm going to be consistent, say no.
Okay. One no.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have on the agenda Stroll and Roll for Compassionate Care ALS fundraiser walk, Ron Hoffman. The route is the bike path from Bourne Farm to Old Dock Road and back on Saturday, May 18, 2019.
Wow.
He's very
I know.
prepared.
I'll move approval.
Move approval.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next, I'll take number 4 on the business calendar, since we do have a 7:30 hearing coming up, the sign variance request for off-premise promotional signs, Gosnold National Prescription Take Back Day, Saturday, October 27, 2018.
Move approval.
Second.
It's a great community service.
Absolutely. All those in favor?
Aye.
Sorry, that was under.
That is under business,
Okay,
number
got it.
3.
Just trying to keep track.
Yep.
Minutes?
We don't need to do the interview, right? So can we just appoint the other member?
That's a good idea. We will next take, is Liz Bassett here by any chance? Okay, we're going to now take the interview vote and appoint committee member of Affordable Housing Committee. We did have an interviewee who was not able to continue. She withdrew her name. We have interviewed one person, and we can go ahead and take that vote today. That would be Jessica O'Brien.
So wait, I guess I'm confused.
So Miss Bassett withdrew her application
both-
because she's
Two withdrawals.
been accepted.
Oh, so they both withdrew.
Oh,
They both withdrew,
Okay,
correct.
got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I didn't yet mention, you're right, Harry McCormick also withdrew.
Oh, yeah.
Great.
So we have Jessica O'Brien. Do I have a motion?
I'd move approval for Jessica O'Brien to the Affordable Housing Committee for a term ending 6/30/2021.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And just to remind everyone, there is one more vacancy still for affordable housing. If anyone is interested, this is a great time to get involved in the town. It's a really great committee.
And just to that, could I just say there's a
Please.
vacancy on Human Services. There will be an upcoming vacancy on the Affirmative Action Committee. So lots of opportunities for people to get involved in some really great committees that we have here in the town. So those will be coming forward, but just for folks to keep in mind.
And Doug Brown is working with the office on getting mission statements from all the committees in terms of updating that and just really doing an overview of what ways that the committees can feel their efforts are really included in all the town policies and goings-on. So appreciate your work on that, Doug. Thanks very much. And also Diane Davidson from the town manager's office. Do I have a hearing
Yes.
notice?
It's right here.
Oh, may I? Okay. All right, so the next item on the agenda is a fee hearing. The police department with respect to fingerprint processing fees. We do have some correspondence that I want to take, and town council is here. Frank, just a quick question in terms of process. Should the correspondence be taken first, or should the hearing notice be read?
I believe Mr. Latimer, who's here on behalf of the Murphys, wants to make some comments about the validity of the process, so I think it would be beneficial to hear him first.
Before the hearing notice is
Yeah.
read. Thank you, Mr. Latimer. Would you come forward?
I would simply like to say that this bylaw is, in my view, unconstitutionally overbroad in certain respects, not related to any rational, necessary public purpose. I'm talking about the provision that applies generally to dealers in second-hand goods. To the extent that includes thrift shops, particularly church thrift shops, has no relation to any public interest because they don't pay for their goods. The people that work there are volunteers. With respect to churches, they are exercising what they consider to be a mission, a religious mission, in supporting their church. Therefore, even though this may be a purely secular matter, we know from the Hobby Lobby case that, and the gay cake wedding cake cases, that these rights can be asserted in terms of secular matters. The fact is, a church lady who works as a volunteer receives items, whether they're stolen or not, isn't paying for them. So it's very unlikely that any thief is going to try to fence stolen items or launder drug money through a thrift shop. It is therefore an undue burden, undue intrusion into the workers, volunteers' personal interest in privacy under the Fourth Amendment to require them to give up generally their fingerprints to the police. And it is an undue burden on the establishments to have to pay a fee for this intrusion. I think this vitiates the entire bylaw, and I think the town meeting should go back and make it very clear that what this does apply to. I understand there are other objections to this, which I agree with, but I just wanted to make that one point.
Thank you. Given that objection, I'm gonna make the suggestion that the board continue the hearing for 2 weeks to provide town council an opportunity to review these concerns. Frank, did you have something to say on that?
Thank you, Ms. Latimer. Mrs. Murphy wanted to make a statement during the public comment period, and I think she wants to talk about something different. Would you like to speak to them today?
I just wanted to.
Oh, Mike, if you don't mind, for the
In other
folks
words,
at home.
if there's two objections here, I'd like to know what both of them are, okay?
Absolutely.
My objection is violation of Chapter 40A, Section 11, Public Hearing Notice and Attorney General Notice, Open Meeting Law, that we were not notified of the fee hearings as for 2 weeks. We were given 48 hours notice excluding Saturdays and Sundays. Telephone conversation this morning with the Attorney General's Municipal Unit Attorney, Nicole Caprioli, confirmed this for me. So, this meeting needs to have public notice, adequate public notice, which was not given.
Thank you. Mr. Duffy.
Thank you for allowing them both to comment. We did receive a letter from Mrs. Murphy this afternoon, came around 3 o'clock. Now I think I understand what the issues are, and I can get back to you in 2 weeks and address them.
Great. So in terms of process, can we continue the hearing without reading the notice?
Let's open the hearing by reading the notice, and then we can go.
If the hearing was posted on October 5th, and today is not the 14-day, then that would make this hearing not valid.
First of all, let me just point out that I think that I'm questioning in my mind whether or not the statute Mrs. Murphy cited applies. It's a zoning statute she cited.
So in an abundance
Of
of
caution,
caution,
we
I think
can-
it would make sense to put everything over. We now know what the concerns are, rather than reading the notice.
Fine, whatever you want.
I mean, that would be my motion.
I
to
think
put
so.
the-
So instead of continue the hearing, we're just gonna,
Put it on another, would it just?
Put it on a 2-week agenda,
Right.
2 weeks from now.
Table it, essentially.
So the motion,
Madam Chair, could I just clarify that we'll need to re-advertise in entirety, as opposed, if you're not gonna read the notice today? We're happy to do that, we just wanna make certain that's the desire of the board.
Well, I'd rather, I understand the inconvenience and the cost associated
problem.
with, but I think if there is, and I don't know, and this was raised at 3 o'clock, so I think town council, I don't know who's correct, so we just need to have that information, but I'd rather err on the side of caution than to open it up and have it be a violation.
I agree.
my only comment on the first objection is, I don't think that's up to us to determine that the town meeting has made an error in constitutional. The Attorney General's made his opinion, and if that were the only objection, I would feel differently. If there's an objection potentially about the validity of the hearing, that makes sense to wait to make sure that we are running a valid
And that's why
hearing.
we wanted to hear both concerns, absolutely. So in that case, is there a motion to continue this for 2 weeks?
So move.
Is there-
To reschedule.
Reschedule it, because we haven't opened it. So I'd
Correct.
reschedule this matter for a 2-week date.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next, we'll go with the Report on Coastal Resiliency Action Committee.
Well, so the other, because 7:45 is the other thing.
Right, Charlie?
Okay, and the rest of the committees.
We have a quick 10 minutes.
Okay. Save the planet in 10 minutes.
Exactly.
Just so you know.
That's gonna do that.
I'm gonna do that at the end. I've got some points to make first. So, that didn't work this afternoon. Does it work now? Or advancing?
Yeah,
Can use
yeah,
this.
it works, it was just turned off.
Okay.
So that's your
There,
arrow
advan-
forward and the arrow back, and
Backward.
just hit the arrow, and it's off
Okay.
now, but hit the arrow.
Thank you. You had wanted for this presentation an update of where we are, as we've already spent more than a year, and you gave us only 3 years. So,
And
but
what's your position with the Coastal Resiliency
I am the
Committee?
chair of the Coastal Resiliency Action Committee.
Thank you.
Charles McCaffrey. Before I do that, I have given you a memorandum on a study for improving resiliency on Minot Beach. There was a report done that recommends nourishment of the beach to protect the road. The committee is supportive of that project. I think it's important, particularly to complement the project to which the town is already committed, the inlet widening and the bridge replacement for water quality purposes. This project would enhance the ability to protect the road that provides access by nourishing the beach. The report recommended that there be so much nourishment and addition of 2 groins to an existing groin and the jetty that will be reconstructed. That aspect of the project, the committee feels, is not necessary at this time, and for various reasons, mainly the general sense that among scientific and engineering communities that hard structures tend to interfere too much with the natural coastal processes, which are going to be so important to our being resilient. And they've been harmed in many ways by the past inappropriate structures. Some structures are necessary, but over the last 100 years, a lot have been built that, while they may protect a given site, are negative for the overall shoreline. In addition, there's the added cost of the groins, and it's probably unlikely that they would get regulatory approval. The study does indicate that the nourishment alone would work. It would need to be replenished in the study, I believe it says 8 years, as opposed to with groins 10 years, so it's not a significant difference. There are some effects of not doing the groins on dredging needs, but they're not significant, and more frequent dredging in the long run would be better for the system. So we think this is a very important project to proceed with that exception. I think it's also very important that the town understand in undertaking nourishment projects such as this, and I think there will be more of them in our future. We haven't made our report, but that's going to be part of our future, that they need to be maintained. So this report indicates that if this is going to protect the road for a significant period of time, it will need to be replenished on a periodic basis. So we need to know that when we go into it, that we're committed to maintaining it. Otherwise, it is, as people say, throwing sand into the water. So we need to maintain them, and this is fine. And the report provides a lot of solid data that justifies why this will work. It's substantial analysis, which is not only useful for this project, but for other activities which we may take. So that's, and I think also the other question that might be raised is, we will face significant changes in our shoreline in the longer term, with sea level rise, a hurricane after we've had 2 feet of sea level rise. At some point in the future, maintaining the road may not be viable, but we're not there yet. This makes sense at this time to do this project.
I mean, that's pretty big news, because there certainly was some concern that abandonment might be something that should be considered, and so I appreciate the committee's view that it's not quite time for that yet. And then, just to go back a little bit, this board has heard, reports of a study that give us, three options. One is do nothing, one is to nourish the beach in front of the vulnerable portion of the road, and the third is to nourish the beach and add the 2 groins to extend the life of the nourishment. And so your committee is recommending the middle, the second recommendation.
That's correct.
There are questions from the board? Sam?
Yeah, nourishing requires a permit, as I understand.
Yes.
Will we be able to get a permit that would allow us to actually go in and maintain whatever beach that we establish? So that if there is a hurricane or a large storm, we actually have the right to go ahead without going through the whole permitting process?
I'm not sure. I know from my experience in New York, that's done. Towns get permits that are contingent, that give them approval to do something in the future. One is involving something such as breach closure. When there's a breach, they have stockpiled sand and you need to move very quickly. So that permit is gotten ahead of time from the state, the Corps of Engineers. It's fine, but we will have to do things like that. I think Peter may want to comment on that, but we're going to have permits that are contingent on future events.
Charlie, did you also have a presentation to put forth?
Yes. I wanted to update you on the work of the committee.
Let me just quickly ask you the time that you need. 3 minutes? Or
5.
Okay, we have 3. Do you want to, let's hold off and just finish with a couple of questions, and then we'll take it after our next hearing. I don't want to shortchange such an important issue. One thing that I think that's interesting is that you suggest that, as part of the recommending the option to, for nourishment, you recommend that some money be put aside in the capital plan so that this is continued going forward, that how important that is to maintain that process if we go ahead with it.
It may not be in the time frame, as this says, 8 years or more, but we need to be aware that we're going to have to support these projects over time. So we don't need money for replenishment or renourishment now, but we will on a regular basis, and understand that type of long-term commitment when we make the decision and it's feasible to nourish. Recognizing that changes will occur. We're in a dynamic situation, particularly when we get to mid-century and sea level rise and more intense storms or storms of longer duration. Our decisions will be different.
Doug?
I have to admit to being a little confused, because I thought the presentation from the expert on this was very clear, and I understood what he was saying about suggesting the nourishment and the groins, but to now have our committee come and make a different recommendation, I'm a little torn as to really where we're going to proceed. I don't think we're making a vote tonight on this issue, but
right.
We've heard 2 different stories.
Well, I think one of the things is that the prior presentation suggested that the permitting for the groins may well be allowed. And so I guess the question...
Because it's a reuse of groins.
Right, and so the question would be, why do you think he's wrong with that? And
I think they might be, but there's a solid chance that they won't be approved.
And then we don't do it.
That's a key issue, because we would have to invest time and money in engineering to get that permitting. And then we'd have to be really looking at the odds of how often has it been allowed, where else has it been allowed, how similar is our circumstance to the ones that have been allowed. So that's something else that we'll have to look at. Megan?
And one other thing, and I know we have to start the other hearing, but the other thing I would love to just hear more about at a later date is the piece that Charlie raised, that the committee's position was that with the groin, you would renourish in 10 years, without the groin in 8. And I know it's kind of an average and a guess, but if that's fairly accurate, and we sort of, suss out what those numbers are, to invest in the growing process versus just to re-nourish it 2 years sooner. I guess I'd like to, as we go on and make
the
those
numbers.
decisions, see sort of that a little bit more. But
One last point is I personally think that if we abandon those remnants of the old groins there and take them out, then we'll never go back to groins. So we have to be aware that if we decide to not go with the groins, then we're probably not gonna get them in the future, whereas a constructive reuse of them, you might have a chance now to use them.
within this project.
Right.
That's a very good point. I apologize, we're going to do the presentation right after this hearing, which we have to call.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you. Good point. Thanks. All right, next we have on the agenda a fee hearing for the 2019 town department fees. The hearing notice is as follows. As provided under Chapter 119 of the Code of Falmouth, a public hearing will be held in the Selectmen's Meeting Room, Falmouth Town Hall, on Monday, October 15 at 7:30 PM to establish and promulgate fees which are effective as of, this is a new, okay.
That's the police ones.
Thank you. Sorry about that. As of January 1st, 2019, to be charged by the town departments and agencies, except as provided under general laws, school department, planning board, library, town clerk, town treasurer, and collector of taxes. This was published in the Falmouth Enterprise, Friday, October 5th, 2018. And who's doing the presenting?
Well, Madam Chair, we have a list of proposed fees from various departments that was solicited and suggested as a matter of routine. And we have various individuals that can answer questions that the board may have about the respective fees. We could go department by department, happy to do that. If you want to care to start in alphabetical order with the beach department,
Could I just ask a question?
Meg.
I'm sorry, before we
Sure.
get started, does the issue about notice that was raised by Ms. Murphy, does it have to do with this as well?
I believe her request was actually having to do with the zoning.
She was, quote, because of, okay.
I think that we're okay with these ones.
Okay.
yeah, the fees that were referred to in that were being handled as a standalone.
Okay.
Because it would have taken effect immediately with the board's actions. These fees, if approved, would take effect January 1st.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that, before we went forward, that.
Good
I
point,
just-
and plus, I'm sure a lot of people at home have that question
Right.
as well. So what would be the board's pleasure? Do you want to take it
By
department by department?
I would suggest we take it by department by department. I would think we probably are not voting these fees tonight, but just hearing the presentation
Right.
and actually having the vote in 2 weeks.
Absolutely. Mr. Magato, I think I saw.
I saw Bruce here earlier, but I don't see him with us here now.
All right,
I'm
let's
I'm happy
skip.
to summarize, Madam Chair, if it'd be helpful.
Yes, please.
As you can see, the present fee for a resident taxpayer and time-sharing interval ownership for a beach, a parking sticker is $35. Those are proposed by the Beach Committee to be increased to $40. And similarly, a fee for a one-week sticker, currently $70, to be increased to $80. A two-week sticker, $120, proposed by the Beach Committee to be increased to $130. A three-week sticker from $170 to $175. A four-week parking sticker from $220 to $225. Summer seasonal sticker, $250 to $275. And lastly, the daily beach parking area fees for Mill Road Beach. Presently, the fee is $10 daily. That is proposed by the Beach Committee to be increased to $15. In Minot Beach, east and west, proposed to increase from $10 to $15. And that's the totality of the Beach Department, Beach Committee recommendations.
So everything else would stay the same?
Correct.
So I'm just a little surprised on the 3-week and 4-week sticker, why those would be only $5 increases when it's for a longer period of time. Percentage ends up being a lot less increase than the 1 and 2. It's not a huge deal, but I guess I would just go ahead and make the 170 into 180 and the 220 into 230. And we're being fairly consistent that all the week-long stickers are being increased by $10.
Megan?
I guess I was gonna say something to that effect. I fully understand the significant costs that go into maintaining the beaches, but I always am hesitant when we have taxpayers, paying that extra amount, and I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but for some folks, I mean, that $40 is going to be prohibitive. I think of families with children who probably are the ones that, need those beaches the most. I don't think it's not an enormous fee, and certainly towns have much larger ones, but I guess if an increase in some of those other stickers could effectuate what we're looking for in terms of funds coming into that department that are appropriate for the needs of the department, I would like to see some consideration of maybe not changing the resident taxpayer.
I agree with the premise, but the math would be, there aren't that many three-week stickers versus this would be everybody in town. I think that's,
right.
That would be a big number that the department might be thinking of. And so it's just a matter of weighing the need for that versus,
No, I mean, I know they voted it, and I'm sure they're all, aware of sort of the needs of the town as well. I guess if we knew what the difference would be, it might be helpful, but,
and Mr. Magatos.
that's okay, we can probably get that information in the interim, just out
Yes,
of curiosity.
that's a very good point.
I'm
We
just
can-
curious what numbers they, how the numbers play out.
Very good point. All right, in which case, move along. Next would be under the Board of Selectmen, advertising fees. With respect to liquor license, from 25 to 50, that's doubled. With respect to wetlands and dock, from 45 to 70, that's almost doubled. With respect to aquaculture, 25 to 85, there's a lot going on in aquaculture. With respect to fuel storage tank, it's 25 to 35. Shade tree hearing is 25 to 35. Building code, Board of Appeals, 25 to 35. Any questions from the board? Thoughts?
Maybe if just folks could hear from Mr. Suso, just the idea behind why those fees have to go up, what sort of impacts that, which I think has to do with the fact that advertising costs.
Yep, we have
the
Jennifer here
town.
too.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, the cost to advertise and for administrative support are significant, advertising particularly, and this helps support that. We try and keep the fees reasonably current, but not excessive, so that's the intent.
Thank you.
Next, the Department of Public Works, Water Department. Thank you. If you'd just let us know, there's a proposal to increase meter fee, 5/8 meter from 175 rather to 275.
Correct. I'm Steve Rafferty, the water superintendent. In the fee schedule, there is a fee for a 5/8 inch meter right now at $175. If you buy any other meter for your property, a 1 inch, 2 inch, or whatever, it's the actual cost of the meter plus, I think, 15% for administrative and whatnot. The actual cost of the 5/8 inch meter today is $237.15. So we're suggesting a change to recover the cost of that meter plus some administrative costs, and that's the only change the water department's asking for.
Any questions?
No, other than, as it stands now, just to state the obvious, we actually are the town's losing money.
Stating the obvious.
Yes, sometimes you have to.
Next we have for the Health Department, is anyone for the Health Department here?
I can get Scott to come up if you skip.
All right, so let's see if there are any questions. There's a proposal for food service, annual or seasonal food service permit, fewer than 50 seats to go from 125 to 150, more than 50 from 50 seats, 150 to 200. All mobile temporary permits over 5 days from 75 to 100. Mobile prepackaged frozen novelties, right now there's no cost and that'll go to 25. With respect to retail food establishments, more than 5,000 square feet retail space with potentially hazardous food preparation from 200 to 300. Less than 5,000 square feet, 150 to 200. With respect to food service, hold on here. Retail stores offering prepackaged foods, frozen novelties, and non-potentially hazardous foods from 25 to 50, and food service reinspection fee for critical violations from none to $100 for the first violation, from none to $200 for subsequent. Mr. Suso, do you know if that would be $200 for every subsequent
That's my understanding, each and every subsequent offense.
Thank you.
I see Scott's here. If we had any-
Are there any questions for Scott? Would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure.
Mike.
Scott McGann, Health Agent.
Thank you very much. We just read the proposed fee changes, and we're just going through whether there are any questions or concerns. Seeing none, we thank you for saying aye. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Next, under inspectional services, we have swimming pools going from $50 to being deleted because they're going to be separated between above and in-ground. 50 for above-ground pools and 150 for in-ground pools.
Is that a
Any
yearly
questions?
inspection?
Is the
I read
building
fr-
department here?
No, but I
Mr.
read the
Sousa?
letter. I do know that what it said was in general, in-ground pools require sometimes up to 4 trips. So before it was the single fee, and sometimes they were going back, 4 times, so that 150 seemed to be more appropriate with the extra work that is required for in-ground versus above-ground pools. The above-ground is usually 1 trip out. In
But
that,
that's both for installing it, not every year we re-inspect it, is that correct? I'm not sure about that.
I believe there are yearly safety inspections.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I
That
think
would
it
be
is
my
an annual.
assumption.
Yes, I
Good.
think that's what it said.
Good.
Yep.
Okay. I missed that one.
Okay, any other questions on pools? Okay. Next, for the sealer of weights and measures, balance and scales, over 10,000 pounds from 150 to 200, 5 to 10,000, 1 to 120, 1,000 to 5,000, 80 to 100, 100 to 1,000, 35 to 40, more than 10 pounds, less than 100, 30 to 35, 10 pounds or less, 20 to 25. Liquid measuring, inlet, half to an inch gasoline, diesel, 35 to 40, pumps, retesting of gas pumps, 25 to 40, others, taxi meters, 35 to 40, and adjustment fees per device from 10 to 35. Questions on that? Sam?
What's the device?
Where?
The-
The
I-
adjustment fee?
The last
Oh,
item says adjustment fee per device. Is this
Is that meter still?
I'm
taxi
assuming,
meters?
I'm assuming it relates to meters, but I'm not certain. I'll have
Any,
to
to any of the
clarify that.
meters?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, next, marine and environmental services for slips and wharfage from April 15 to June 15, it's $1 a foot. That's gonna be deleted, as well as the 150 a foot for June 16 to June 30. And it's gonna be moved from April and May, none to $1 per foot. June, none to $1.50, so that is gonna be split up differently. And then September 1 to November 15, $1 a foot is gonna be deleted, and it's gonna be delineated first September from none to $1.50, and then October and November from none to $1. Questions? Okay, Main Marina and Davis Floating Dock section, resident, 156 per foot currently is gonna go to 157. Non-resident, 179 is gonna go to 180. Charter boat section, resident, 156 to 157 per foot, non-resident, 179 to 180 per foot. Winter in-water storage monthly, from $7 a foot, that's gonna be deleted. Season, which runs November 15 to April 15, that's $30 per foot currently. Both of those are deleted. Also deleted is the winter power, 30 amp monthly, $15, seasonal, 100. Winter power, 30 amp monthly, $40, seasonal, $250. Those are all deleted. In Green Pond,
So actually,
pardon? Go
can we get
ahead.
answers to what's going on there?
Yeah, I was hoping to see this change going
I
forward.
thought what it said was we don't really do in-water storage in the winter. I thought that's what the letter said. So that's why it was deleted, because it's really not something,
It's not used.
it's not used. That was my understanding.
Mr. Suso, do you know anything differently? Mr.
We
Johnson,
think-
stop?
We think we have a representative from the committee, Mike Kinney. I don't know if Mike's here with us. He was going to be. I don't see him in the audience.
It just says, I can just only read the letter, but it just says, delete winter storage fees, we do not do in water storage. So I guess it's not applicable to the actual practice of the
Okay.
department, is my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Next would be Green Pond resident from 142 to 143 a foot, non-resident 163 to 164 a foot, Eel Pond Dock outhauls, contract April 15 to November 15 from $900 to $300. Boy, you never see anything going down. That's, next, Mr. Olnick, I know, is here, so if there are any questions on recreation, would you like to come forward? And if you want, I can read the changes, and if you...
If you'd like, Joe Olenek, Recreation Director.
Thank you. All of the fees from youth sports such as football, soccer, basketball, baseball, softball, and indoor soccer are now 26, are going to 30. And then summer sailing, which is a 2-week session, is going from 50 to 75. If you could just let us know what the thinking was here.
The thinking was, we had gotten the report back from the auditor from last year, and the auditor seemed to think that we were quite a bit underpriced compared to every other Cape Town, which is why a lot of people in the town of Falmouth really like what we do. They can get a pretty affordable deal, and they get a shirt, socks, shin guards and stuff for soccer. And we felt, well, maybe we are pretty low. There was some good discussion amongst the committee about whether we should increase this or not, due to some of the underprivileged families in town. So I thought if we came up with a modest increase of $4 for the basic programs, because we have not raised the fees since we first went to online registration, and that went from 25 to 26. So I thought maybe the $4 might, help appease the auditor aspect of it. And sailing, what we've been able to give them for sailing for 2 weeks for, very, very cheap money, I thought was a very good deal, and I think we could increase that a little bit because we sold out every session we had this year. We actually added 2 extra sessions and filled those up as well, and not looking to expand on that for next year. But we thought the modest increase would be a good start into solidifying what we have going.
Great, Ms. Varga.
Joe, could you just tell me what sort of is the practice? Because I know rec department is usually pretty good in trying to assist kids who
Yes.
maybe can't make these, the parents can't get these funds together. Can you just let us know sort of what the practice is?
The practice is we try to get a scholarship request from the school adjustment counselors, and we put out there a number of 5 per school. Some schools put in 7, which we accept. Some schools put in 2 or 3, which we accept. Try our best not to decline anybody that's in need, regardless of how many we've accepted into the programs through scholarship. We try to, not turn anybody away.
Could I ask you, have you guys considered, I've seen this in some other places, but where when you sign your own kid up, you can sort of pay the extra to sponsor another kid that maybe you don't know, but in essence, it would be a donation to the rec department?
I have not seen that. That has not come up in our
I've seen that for
policies.
field trips, even in this town, where they've asked, you pay the $10 for your child to go to the aquarium,
Right.
and if you want, you can include another $10, which they're not gonna leave any kid out.
Right,
So it's gonna
right.
go to the, the PTO.
Which is kind of what we do anyway, but if somebody wanted to do that, we certainly would look at it and certainly not tell them no, they couldn't do it, but that we accept as many kids through scholarship as we can without somebody having to do that.
Do you think the rec department would mind looking into formalizing that, sort of spearheading that idea, just to,
just know
have
they're-
it printed on the form, or see how it's done in other
Yeah,
communities?
we could do that.
I just know there are a lot of generous people in town that if they knew and it was very easy for them to donate, they would.
Well,
and
we
they'd
have
be
our
happy.
newsletter that we can send out as many times as we want. That would certainly be something we could put on the newsletter and get that word out there. That way we can keep things cheap and affordable for everybody.
Excellent. Other questions, Mr. Olnick? Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
For this part of the hearing, I just want to ask if there's anyone in the audience who has a question or wants to speak in favor or against. Please, Bob, come on up.
I'm a member of the Recreation Committee, and the Recreation Committee voted 4-1 to change the fees from $26 to $30. I was the one vote that voted no, so obviously I'm not here representing the Recreation Department. The reason why I voted no was for a number of reasons, but one of them was we're missing an assistant recreation director. They're cutting staff, and they're raising the price for $4. Maybe I'm trying to make a point. And another point is, this recreation department position is very important. The excuse is, everything's going fine, everything is going okay, and so why don't we split the position with the beach department? In the meantime, there's many of us who don't think that everything's going okay, and everything's going fine. 2 weeks ago, you heard from Patricia Morano, a Recreation Department former committee member, employee, and real strong Recreation Department enthusiast. And she said she doesn't think there's enough programs, and she doesn't think there's enough staff, and I don't think so either. You know, part of the responsibilities of the Assistant Recreation Director, and going to what you were saying, Selectman English, about, you know, scholarships and people who can't afford it. Well, people don't come to the Recreation Department and go up to the counter and say, I need a scholarship. You know, people around, they don't do that. You know, part of the responsibilities of the Assistant Director of Recreation is to make frequent contact with the general public, school and town departments. So this Assistant Recreation Director position could go into the schools, speak to the school adjustment counselors, speak to the risk counselors, speak to the physical education teachers who should be in sports, who can't afford to be in sports, can't get a ride to sports, or their families can't figure out how to even go about it. You know, I think this is something that needs to be part of the Recreation Department. And this $4, I mean, what is it actually going to do? It's actually, according to the numbers, I think it amounts to $6,112 more a year, based upon 1,528 kids signing up for sports, an extra $4. I mean, what's $6,000 going to do? I think I know I'm here fighting over $4, but to some families, that could be 2 gallons of gas, okay? And maybe that's not a lot to some of us here, okay? But if you're poor and you have 3 kids, you know, in recreation that you want to sign up, that's a lot of gas money, you know? And I think that the $4 is just a token. I don't think it's needed. And I think if you hired the right people, if you hired an assistant recreation director, I probably wouldn't have a problem with the $4. Then maybe that person can go into the schools and get kids to sign up for scholarships. Because I know there's kids out there who would play sports, but they need someone to give them a push. They need a helping hand, and I'd just like to make a point. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw another hand. Anyone else who wants to speak with respect to the potential fee changes? Okay, seeing none.
I would move we continue the hearing for 2 weeks.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The hearing is continued for 2 weeks.
And during that time, we can also ask that if people have emails or suggestions they want to email us, we'd be happy to get those.
Please do send your comments to the Selectmen's email, and we'll go ahead and keep them in the file and distribute them. Mr. McCaffrey, sorry for the interruption. I understand you have a presentation as well.
Yes.
And I wonder if you'd introduce other members of the committee who may be appearing here?
Yes. Melissa Freitag. Paul Dreyer. Andrew Ashton.
And on the other side? Thank you for coming, everyone. Appreciate that. Appreciate all your work.
All right. There's a
Thank you, Jennifer.
No problem. Oh, there we go.
Before I start the presentation, I wanted to give a quick review of what's been happening in the last year. The presentation deals with one specific item. We began by getting information from a lot of people that are knowledgeable on the issues, various aspects, and we're continuing to do that. So we've gotten, heard on the coastal resiliency system, USGS, Ray Jack spoke to us, the Cape Cod Commission. We've scheduled meetings to hear from Mass CZM and the Woods Hole Research Center. So we're getting at a lot of our meetings now, we're getting people to come in and give a 20 or half-hour presentation to enhance our understanding of the issues. So the first thing we did when we heard about from the person who works for the county is the coastal community rating system, which allows people to get reduced rates on their flood insurance if the municipality can show that they're doing more than the minimum under the flood insurance program. That process, the county is providing that service, and the county person is working with Bob Shea to gather the information to submit to FEMA so that people may be eligible for it. Initially, it'll probably be a small percentage, but as we do more to increase our resiliency, we can expect to get better credits from FEMA that we're doing much more than is required to reduce the cost of storms. The next major activity was the Massachusetts Vulnerability Program. The state is sponsoring grants to the states, to the towns, to develop programs on vulnerability. It starts out with a workshop. We were given $20,000 by the state. We held the workshop. Based on a report on that workshop, the state determined that we're eligible to receive funds. And the good news is, we'll see what happens, but the governor has indicated that there will be up to $300 million for coastal resiliency going forward in bond money. So we want to be able to be more than ready to tap into that. And we were really the first town, along with Sandwich on the Cape, to be approved to apply for grants. We did apply. We had a very short window, and we didn't get it, but it wasn't on the substance of what we submitted. They wanted more references. They said it was too ambitious. We could do it.
It's a good problem to have.
But it has good content, and we will be back to the state for some of that, as well as for many other projects. I mean, there's possibly the money for the design of, some of the design of the Minot could be funded under coastal resiliency state money. The next major thing, and that's the major activity that's underway, town meeting had appropriated $80,000, and the Woods Hole Group is undertaking to develop a model of what our risks are. This is a much more sophisticated model of where the risks lie than, say, the FEMA maps. And it's been developed jointly by the state, particularly DOT, and it's been applied in Boston and a few other communities. So we'll be one of the first in the state to have this level of information. And that should be done by June of next year. It will not just be a model to show where the risks are and what is at risk, but they will be making recommendations and working with us on at least some recommendations on how we would address those risks.
Chairman?
Please.
Yeah.
The Cape Cod Commission has a similar kind of tool, and I didn't know whether we could get access to that.
Yes, they haven't finished that, and it's really not a similar tool. Okay, this is a map, think more like the FEMA maps. Where are we at risk, and what's in those places at risk that are at risk, and what's the nature of that? The tool that the Cape Cod Commission is developing is more analogous to what they did for water quality, how you can assess, and we were instrumental. We had all these options of what's the best option in this situation to address water quality. So they're developing a tool that will show the range of options for addressing coastal resilience and how do they fit. So they'll have a model so you can take a approach and how will it work in this area? Does it make sense in this area? They're still doing a lot of the testing on that. So that will be useful in coming up with recommendations when we know the nature of the risk and what's at risk.
Can I quickly comment on one of the points that you made, and I really want folks at home to know this about your committee. When this board appointed you as, the Coastal Resiliency Action Committee, as you mentioned, it was really one of the first on the Cape. And the state is, gives favor to communities who have shovel-ready projects. When there is a lot of competition for grant funding, Falmouth has, not just in this area, but, with road work, with many issues, the fact that Falmouth does a good job with planning and in seeing, things that are about to be given grant funds for, and you kind of went over it quickly, but the fact that you are in a position to, as a committee on Falmouth's behalf, to really vie for these grant funds. I mean, I think that's one of the important points as you come about just in a year of really existing. The fact that you're kind of teeing up to be ready for these monies if they become available from the state is very important.
And when we only had a couple of weeks when we became eligible for that grant, we had a meeting and we threw around several ideas, all of which are still there, to be looked at, to get, as soon as we know that there's a grant application deadline, and that should happen soon, we'll have projects ready.
Right, thank you.
Particularly working with DPW. What I wanted to talk about next is moving forward, to give you a sense of what the report we will give you at the end of this process, what we hope to be in it. Now, will we fill out everything? But I wanted an ambitious outline of the scope of what the town needs to know and needs to do over the long term. So obviously an introduction. This will give what's the state of our knowledge, what's happening with coastal climate change, and what's some of the work that's already been done. We had, for example, several years ago, the Coastal Resources Working Group, which provided an excellent report. And a lot of what we will use that report extensively. It's still a very solid report for both Martha's Vineyard Sound and Buzzards Bay. Get rid of that. All right. So the report will look at the issues and analysis. What are the forces that are affecting our coast? The resources at risk, the current programs and laws, because a lot of this, it's not just coming up with a project, but there's a whole regulatory scheme that exists that sometimes helps us and sometimes works against us. We need to understand that more fully to identify ways where we can make changes, and the role of other agencies and how we can draw on the work of others. What did I do? All right, the natural forces. In some detail, flooding, and by this we're looking at more what's sometimes been called nuisance flooding, but it's more associated with rain, very high tides. We need to better understand that. What's the pathways of floodwaters? Erosion, ongoing erosion, which we've experienced throughout the centuries. The recession rates, what's happening? That data is available from the state. Nor'easters are a significant problem ongoing. Then there are the large storms, the hurricanes, the major tropical storms, and sea level rise. So we will give a good description of all of these forces and how they're affecting us. Oh, what did I do? All right. What are the resources and uses at risk? And when we talk about risk, we're not just talking about the buildings and the roads that are at risk from storms, but our natural resources, the wetlands the beaches, the bluffs that will be impacted by particularly sea level rise and significant storms. So public infrastructure, private development, and it's going to be important to recognize that the town's obligation is to public resources, but there are ways in which we might be able to identify mechanisms and approaches that can help private development facilitate its protection in ways that don't harm public resources. There are vulnerable populations. The beaches and the natural resources, as I said, these are changed and affected by this. We're a town, we want significant healthy beaches, wetlands for habitat, for other uses. In addition, groundwater will be affected by the rising sea level, which can affect septic systems. As I mentioned, government programs. Here are some of the government programs that it's going to be important to look at closely. The flood insurance program. We can't do it, but we've got to be aware exactly how it works and affects us. Wetland regulations can be looked at. Coastal Area Resources is an existing program. We need to understand it. The Cape Cod Commission, as you mentioned, has a lot of programs and ability to assist us in this effort. Mass Coastal Zone, the Municipal Vulnerability Program, which could be an important source of funding. The town has completed a detailed multi-hazard mitigation program, which is a requirement of FEMA. We're going to have to look at town land use regulations, and we'll look at capital budget projects that need to be advanced. So this is some of the other agencies that we'll want to talk to and consider how they can help. All right. What happened here? I skipped one. Oh, policy. A big part of the project will also look at what policies does the town want to adhere to in dealing with coastal resiliency. We can identify specific projects, but there were situations that will come up over the years, policies that can be useful for many years or decades if they're kept up to date, and decision-making standards, and how will they be enforced among town agencies so that we're always thinking resiliency. And implementation are most important. There'll be local law changes. We'll try to identify administrative and organizational changes and capital projects, which will be a major part of this. And in looking at implementation, particularly in projects, we want to be able to, what's the time frame? Because we've got major problems at the end of the century, and we have near-term problems and changing problems throughout the next 80 years. And some of them we have to, even the ones that are far out, we need to begin looking at those now and developing approaches. For example, if areas are going to be inundated that are now developed and are no longer habitable, that's going to be a long lead time to develop programs and ways of addressing that issue. And some areas could be inundated by the mid-2050. So we will make recommendations that look to the near term, 20 years, mid-century, end of century, and equally as the time period, we've got to begin to develop post-storm plans so we're not caught by surprise when we get a major storm. And the instinct, as it has often been, let's put things back, rather than change the way they are so they'll be less vulnerable in the future. And I think it's very important, and we've talked about in the committee, that our recommendations will be, particularly the capital ones, be site-specific. Even some of the land use. We know what areas will be inundated and in the future will not be habitable. We need to identify those now. So I feel the recommendations should be organized by 14 areas, and we should have something to say specifically about each of these and the nature of the risks and what may need to happen in those areas. So these are both neighborhood related as well as coastal processes and reach considerations. We haven't drawn the line between them yet, but we will. So it's an ambitious report that we intend to give you, and it won't have everything that it should have or could have. But there's a lot of information, particularly from the Woods Hole Group work, that we expect will feed into this. There'll be many other reports. So in part, in putting things in this context, we'll be cutting and pasting from other sources.
So with respect to the, the neighborhoods that are listed, do you have a space on the town website in case, for example, some of the neighborhood associations or village associations want to contact you to provide input or history or questions? And then second question is, with respect to the county now, has just started a coastal resiliency committee as well, and I'm wondering if if one of the members of your committee will be attending that just to trade information or steal, research or whatever, oh, wait a minute.
Well, at the
Just
county
collaborate,
level,
that's the word I was looking for.
at the county level, I wear two hats too.
Right.
I'm your representative to the Cape Cod Commission, which is doing that. And there's also a committee that I've been on, the executive committee and that's being reorganized, but I'll still be part of that, which is the Coastal Resources Committee. So, and on that, I'm a county commissioner's appointee.
Right.
So, yes, there's so much going on, and part of our job is to glean from everything that's happening, what's most relevant, what will work for us, how do we package it in a way that we can understand it and develop documents that we can use, how do we modify other plans, the comprehensive plan, your strategic plan. These things, what we develop should feed into those, and the capital plan, those three major plans.
And how do people, do you have a website that folks can contact you?
We do.
Great. Megan?
We have not taken as full advantage of it as you're recommending, and we need to do that.
I was just going to emphasize, sometimes the people who know the best about sort of, the section that you had up there, kind of that nuisance flooding, right? That maybe
Yeah.
doesn't get the big attention, but it's regular, and people who've lived somewhere for 50, 60 years have a really good eye on exactly, how that affects their area. And so for those people, hopefully they will, if they're watching, or maybe we can make sure we get some better public outreach to solicit some of that information, because they're sometimes the best experts for some of that localized.
An area where DPW is very knowledgeable. And that will change. As we read about in places like Norfolk or Miami, they're getting constant, every high tide
Now it
is flooding, and high tides will gradually get higher with the rising sea level, so it'll become insidious and gradually cover more and more areas.
I want to recognize Jen McKay's assistance with the committee as well, and the great coordination with Concom, and, just really appreciate that level of knowledge and, kind of extra professionalism, and and DPW as well, so thanks for the staff assistance. Any questions for Charlie? Doug?
Just, have you guys had any opportunity to research any of the bigger solutions like the offshore reefs or?
We haven't looked at specific techniques yet. That's one of the things that will be helpful from the Cape Cod Commission. In other words, they're looking at the whole range of options and what are the situations, and trying to identify the situations in which they will work.
Mm-hmm.
So one good example would be on our bay shores, if they're eroding, what may work there won't work on a bluff shoreline because it's much more dynamic. So, and they'll give us some of that information that will be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Huge project. Thanks to everyone on the committee for all your efforts. Next, we have a presentation of Weston and Sampson Consultants Report on potential relocation, repurposing of the wind turbines. After the presentation, I want to take about 10 minutes of any questions from any member of the public. who might want more information, need more information. There'll be a total of 10 minutes for that, and no more than 2 minutes per person. I also want to just kind of give a quick overview before the presentation starts. The Board of... thank you. Thank you very much. You mentioned that you might want to tape some. Is there anybody else who's taping the meeting, by the way? Okay, so you'll be taping this section, and then you'll let me know if there's another section that you want to tape, correct? Thank you for that. So broadly speaking, the Board of Selectmen has been really in conjunction with the building inspector's directive and just concerns of the community, really been pushing for some more information in terms of options going forward. This is an early report. It's not going to contain all the possibilities. We had earlier asked for and really solicited ideas from the community, thoughts from the community. We had a lot of folks send emails. We want to continue that process, so we just wanted to do this. In fact, I really insisted that there be a report coming this month, so we're going to start with where the engineers are and what we have right now, just so we can start the process on this review and the deliberation. So welcome, if you would introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and the board and the management here in town. My name is Steve Weah. I'm with Weston and Sampson Engineers. I have done work here in the town, I think, for the last 11 years or so. By way of background, if you don't know me, I know many people in town, but I haven't been here since 2014, I think. So I'm a professional geologist by education. I've worked for 29 years in the engineering geosciences. 24 years I've been a licensed professional geologist in Florida and New York. In the last 11 years I've worked for Weston and Sampson Engineers. Weston and Sampson is a 120-year-old civil engineering firm. Primarily, we're engaged in water, wastewater, renewable energy, environmental issues. And we were asked in 2007, about the time that I came on with the company, to help out in looking at a wind turbine project. And the town I compliment, I heard some things during the coastal resiliency that sounded a lot like what the town was talking about 11 years ago. And it's tough to be first, but you guys have a great town. You run a very good town here. I've been to many towns throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in my time developing renewable energy projects. Just to give you a little bit of background, we've looked at probably 44 sites, all in New England, most in Massachusetts, where we have studied wind, solar, biomass, hydropower. 22 of those feasibility studies have been focused solely on wind. We have helped design and permit, like here in Falmouth, 13 projects, 6 of which went to construction with 11.4 megawatts worth of wind turbines, representing 8 individual units. And when I started in Massachusetts, there were only 5 wind turbines that were in operation, to give you an idea. Since then, we've probably helped develop 200 plus megawatts of solar projects, 16 kW, a small little rooftop on Crooked Pond solar at the water treatment plant was part of the ARA Shovel Ruddy projects, as was Wind 2 at the time. We also did some feasibility studies related to the development of the 4 megawatts that's on the closed landfill, and we still do inspections for Citizens Energy for compliance with DEP as relates to that project, to give you an idea. So with that, again, our involvement primarily with Wind 1 and Wind 2 have been focused on design and permitting and construction phase engineering services. This particular last study that we had done, when Julian had called me and asked that we wanted to look at some things, this was really a small study. It started out as a $14,000 study when we first talked about it in the springtime, and he wanted to examine the feasibility of implementing an action and specifically moving the turbine so as to lessen the impacts of the turbine in the community. The scope that we had talked about was to evaluate an alternate location for Wind 2, estimate what those likely sound impacts would be based on the preponderance of data that we had collected. Falmouth happens to be a town that has been the focus of a lot of study, and so there'll be a lot of good information that we have already collected. To give you an idea, a $14,000 feasibility study is fairly small in the context of doing a wind feasibility study that often start at 40,000 and then often go over 100,000. When you're looking at putting up Met towers, which the town had already done a long time ago, to measure the wind resource, to do background sound studies to measure ambient and what the likely impacts would be, shadow flicker impacts, all of these things are elements and parts of a feasibility study. The primary one, of course, is to estimate what the energy production is, because if you're going to build a wind turbine, it has to produce energy from wind in order to be effective. To develop an opinion of probable cost to move that wind turbine, we looked at some alternate uses of Wind 1, and then we added an economic analysis just to round out, because most feasibility studies are focused on technical feasibility and financial feasibility, and something that's technically feasible may not be financially feasible, and a go, no-go decision should be made based on that data.
I wonder if, well, on your back slide, if you could just make a quick comment about the difference in the analysis between Win 1 and Win 2, because I noticed it says alternative location for Win 2, but not Win 1, and it just says alternative use of Win 1.
So for the alternate use of Win 1, I think that what we had done is, in our discussions, we had focused, because of some of the permitting pathways that we had started down with Win 1. The last time I was here in 2014, we were directed to file, and we were helping support Zoning Board of Appeals, and that was identified as the proper pathway at the time to look at permitting. And so that permit ultimately was denied by the ZBA. And so if Wind 1 is not legal where it stands, then you have to look at either moving it or taking it down. And so some of the alternate uses might have been to turn the tower into a communication, like a cellular tower. We had also talked about looking at resale, if there was a buyer out there that wanted to put it to use. Could be in Nebraska, for all we know. It could also potentially be used for spare parts, because parts for wind turbines are expensive, and the operation and maintenance costs, they're expensive on a year-over-year basis, and if something breaks, that's above and beyond. It's sort of like an automobile in that regard, that the longer they've been in service, the more care that they generally take.
So just to summarize.
Sure.
Both Win 1 and Win 2 could be relocated out of town, but only Win 2 potentially might be located in town in a different place.
That's the prevailing wisdom at this moment,
Is that,
yes.
okay.
Right. And so we looked at some of in the alternate locations, we looked at what the site layout, basically how much real estate you had, what the setbacks needed to be, and the elevations. All of those play a role in siting a wind turbine ultimately. So for the existing site configuration, just to give you an idea, and I apologize, one of the things that we worked on, we just finished this report, published it on Friday. We had a meeting during the week, and one of the things that Julie and I had talked about was, because of the scale of this, sometimes we engineers or geologists print things that are so small, they're very difficult unless you zoom in and look at them. But to give you an idea, the parcel itself, contiguous land that the wastewater treatment plant sits on, is about 328 acres. So you see this bold lime green line on the outside, that's the parcel line. And then what you'll see is this dotted line that is technically what we consider the safety setback, and that's the fall zone plus 10% of the structure height. And so automatically, any location for Wind 1 or 2, if you were to move them, would have to be inside of those boundaries. And then we start looking at things like topography and elevation. To give you an idea, Wind 1 sits at an elevation of 151 feet above sea level. Wind 2 is about 130 feet above sea level. And the Notice turbine, which you can see in the image, which is over here off of your property, sits at about 170 to 178 feet in elevation. So the land generally slopes down to Route 28, and it gets higher as you go towards the east side of this parcel. So if we look at some of the interior spaces, the other considerations that we look at when we're trying to site a turbine are just environmental considerations. Are you in a wetlands that, you would have to do either some additional permitting? There's some natural heritage and endangered species program has us look at species. There are, I think the box turtle has been identified as a species of concern out here that you would have to deal with. And also just geomorphically, this is a glacial deposits that has a lot of kettle holes that go down as low as an elevation of 15 feet on the same property. So there's a big discrepancy. And if you took a wind turbine like this and you put it in a kettle hole, it frankly isn't going to work very effectively as a wind turbine. The alternate location, when we looked at them, again, and I'll flip probably back and forth to this so that you can see really those circles that have been drawn here. They're also with respect to sensitive receptors. And so we look at where the base of the turbine is, and the GIS analysts snap a distance, and they pull a circle out until they touch the first residential property. And a residential property is considered a sensitive receptor from a sound impacts or flicker impacts. Unlike the commercial properties where people aren't exposed 24/7 if they live on their property, people that go to work in an industrial park may have 8 hours of exposure. So these stem from DEP noise policy guidelines that we take our cues, and so we looked at what these distances were. And from Win 1, the nearest residential abutter on the south side to Blacksmith Shop Road is just over 1,300 feet, 1,303 feet to the nearest residential abutter, and Win 2 was 1,102 feet, I think, if I read that correctly. And so these are the circles that we draw just to see how close they are. The rule of thumb used to be 1,000 feet, but we know that through a lot of the study here, the sounds and sites of a wind turbine can be smaller than 1,000 feet. So we looked at an alternate location, again, within the property that moves this within the safety setback and tries to put it as far away from any other residential receptors that we could possibly get. And I think from this location that has an elevation of 115 feet, is 2,147 feet to the nearest residential receptor to the north, and 2,244 feet to the nearest residential receptor to the south. And that takes the Win 2 from its present location and would have to build a road to go down along these settlement basins, and to build it, to be able to access it, that's about a half a mile moving it from its present location to this alternate location. And we called it alternate location 1 because there's an infinite number of places that you could move it. But we had to decide on something that made sense from a wind siting standpoint first. So that's the location, and a lot of the analysis was done from this to calculate. We civil engineers, if we want to figure out how much something costs, we have to know where it's going to go, how long the road has to be, the electrical duct bank, all of the interconnection issues all revolve around picking a location. And so this is sort of just a conceptual site plan of where it would go. There's an amount of clearing that has to be done in order to erect this. The ground is generally, this access road is a little bit wider than your typical, F-150 pickup access because of the size of the equipment that has to be brought in to move it. It's no small feat of an engineering to set it up, and you have to have about 3 or 4 acres of a clear area in order to just assemble the rotor on the ground to be able to pick it up with a crane and put it into place. So moving to the sound impacts, we took a lot of the data that had been accumulated by HMMH and others that were hired a number of years ago to study this, and we looked at the data that had been collected from both long and short-term monitoring points, and we didn't attempt to recreate any of these acoustical studies because frankly they cost a lot of money. I think that we probably spent in excess of $150,000 in years gone by in setting up microphones and collecting, measuring, and analyzing a lot of data. So we tried to synthesize this and boil it down to its essence in terms of what the sound impacts are with distance, and plotted the available data that we had to see how the sound impacts are likely to be at a prescribed distance. And if you knew how far your receptor was away from the proposed location, if it was 2,000 feet, you could simply come off of this graph and expect to hear 2 decibel above background increase. And again, it's a very simplified way of looking at it, but we thought it was appropriate for this.
And can you explain that on those numbers you're talking about?
Sure.
When you go from a 2 to a 4, this is on a logarithmic scale, and so it's, what effect actually is the relationship between an increase of 2 decibels and 4 decibels above?
Right. So I'm not going to attempt, or I don't hold myself out to be an acoustic professional. There has been a lot of debate and a lot of information about that in prior reports that have been here. Suffice it to say, the DEP noise policy looks at any stationary new source of sound as 10 decibels above background as being considered the potential for a nuisance. And if it's more than 10, you're technically in violation. And so if it's less than that, but you're right, it is a logarithmic scale. And generally, as it's been described to me, our increases above background in the 1 to 3 range are barely audible. So it would be difficult to perceive them, but it's not to say that you couldn't hear them. The conditions just have to be right for it. Generally, Falmouth is a quiet place, and we've done background studies in Falmouth, in Western Mass, and in Worcester, and in Boston. And the sound backgrounds naturally, they get louder where you have a more urbanized area. And the world, unfortunately or fortunately, is getting to be a louder and louder place. But I believe that, if I'm not mistaken, from my memory, 28 decibels was the average sound background noise levels in Falmouth. So it's fairly quiet. And natural background sound levels are masked by the wind blowing through trees, and you've heard all of these things with birds and crickets and things all add to the cacophony of sounds that are in the background. But 1 to 3 decibels, I think, is considered pretty low by most people's standards. Not everybody's. Shadow flicker, this is just a snapshot out of one of the many shadow flicker studies that we had done in support of the ZBA application in 2014. And this is really just to show that there's a classic bow tie shape that people like to describe in terms of these isoplests represent hours of shadow flicker that are potential based on the sun rising in the east and setting in the west, and the blades that spin and will cause a shadow flicker in hours per year. And this model was done, it probably set 2,000 feet away from the base of the turbine as the limits of the model. That's why you see it truncated so neatly here. If you extended it out a little bit, they would eventually go to 0. The green areas are where no shadow flicker or 5 to 9 hours occur. The red area is 10 to 24 hours per year. And the areas that are in blue is where no shadow flicker will be experienced because the phenomenon just can't occur there, the way that the sun is positioned at this point on the earth. It is based on the terrain. This model was based on the V82 with an 80-meter tall tower. If you move this lower, you're likely to see those bow ties shrink in size. And if you move it 1,000 feet to the right, then the whole thing is going to move 1,000 feet to the right. And so we think that it isn't really necessary to model the shadow flicker at any one particular location. We have a fairly good grip on the fact that shadow flicker generally in any of the residential areas wouldn't be experienced if you moved it 2,400 feet over to the east.
But would it be experienced in the commercial location?
In the industrial park?
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it probably would.
And that would be yellow?
It probably would be yellow based on the distance of the setbacks.
Thank you.
That's correct. And it would be only in the afternoon hours when the sun is setting. So, again, feasibility level, energy production, this is fairly standard. We want to know the unit that's going to be produced, how tall is it, what the average wind speed is, the tower height, and to come up with how much energy it would end up producing. And so some of the modeling variables that we put in are Fortunately, we had them all because it's the same units, and it didn't take a lot of effort to figure this out. Normally, a feasibility study might evaluate a range of turbine sizes. In this case, we only looked at the asset that the town already owns sitting out there. The summary of probable costs to move it at an alternate location on the wastewater treatment property is about $3,025,000. And so this is based on what is typically done from the geotechnical design and permitting. There's civil site improvements, that's basically the roadway and the duct bank. The structural site improvements are the foundation system that support Win 1 and Win 2. We have the great fortune as engineers, these were done under design build. They were both done using the identical foundation design. It's a very tried and true design, and it's worked twice, so we're pretty confident it would work again. It's just steel and concrete costs a little bit more today than it did 10 years ago. The cost to rig and dismantle, move and re-erect a turbine from the vendors that have a crane that are in the 300-ton, 300 feet tall capacity, they give an idea of about $1 million. And so this, we compared to the cost estimates and the pay recs that we had the benefit of having two prior projects that were identical in size and scope. They were very close in terms of what they cost. And so we could look at that data and compare what was done before to what we want to do now. And they're basically the same, with the exception of the project now would involve erecting it. The crane, just to dismantle the turbine, the crane has to be taken apart and moved to the new location, the components moved over and then reassembled. So the common sense would tell you that it would cost a little bit more than the $4.3 million that it cost last time, minus the capital value of the asset itself, which is about $2.8 million. This is what we had talked about just a little bit ago about Win 1. It could be dismantled and used for parts, primarily because you have the exact same unit. The V82 has long been called a workhorse of it. It's actually retired from Vestas's fleet. They have always moved to bigger and better, and so I think the V90 is the smallest turbine that they make now, but they have literally thousands of these that are in use in North America and in New England, mostly up in upstate New York. They have fairly large wind farms. We looked at scrap value, and again, both scrap value and selling it to a third party ended up being a wash for the town. And what I mean by that is that the cost for a salvager to come in and break it, it's a lot like ship breaking, these old tankers, where if they got cut up into pieces that were small enough to haul away for scrap, the cost of doing that, they basically would do it for you for the value of that scrap, and they wouldn't pay you anything, and they would hopefully make money on that. Same thing that when we had originally talked to some folks that were interested in them, that again might put them to use in Nebraska, the cost of transporting it from Falmouth to Nebraska comes with a pretty heavy price tag, and you could probably get someone, you might get a little bit of money, but it wouldn't be a large windfall. Use as a cellular tower, it's certainly possible. Like the tower is 80-meter tall, and so from my perspective, and I'm someone that had worked in the heyday of the cellular build-out across this country, and it's largely been built out. There are some spotty coverage areas where if you complained enough to your cellular carrier, they might look at putting some more antennas or repeaters up, and it might have some value to that, but you'd have to find that person or that company that wanted to do that and be willing to pay you to put antennas on the outside of this tubular tower.
It's been tried for years in West Falmouth. Quite people have asked. Yeah, that's a tough road.
Yeah. Some data points that I know that when we were doing studies for the Mass DOT, they actually wanted to put up a wind turbine at the Blandford Rest area, which a project that never happened. They were a host to some cell towers out there. And the value at the time is around $60,000 per year is like a typical host fee. If you're a landowner where there was a need for someone to install it, they would put one up. And you see them all over the Cape. There are usually towers with 3, 4, 5 different carriers that have antenna arrays at different heights, and they all lease space from each other, and that's the typical arrangement. That cellular network has largely been built out. You know, you see it in TV commercials all the time.
Plus, wouldn't you have the cost of taking the blades down?
You would, yeah. So there, you know, again, you have to have, you know, the same size. I don't have the image, but the picture of the crane that was necessary to hoist the blades into place would still be the same one that you would need to take them off again.
But we have to do that.
Well, no, I'm just looking, in other words, you could scrap for scrap out, you could get a scrapper to come in, it'd be a net zero is what he's saying.
Okay.
But I'm saying with respect to a use of a cell tower, you might get the rent over a number of years, but you would have to take away the cost of taking the blades.
And you'd want to have a plan in place for the rental, so you don't have a crane coming 2 times.
Exactly.
Right.
Doug?
But it's not just the money, it's an improved service for
Yes.
people in town.
Right, right.
The view is spectacular. You know, there was one wind developer I remember talking to 10 years ago, and he wanted to, you know, give rides up to the top of the tower for $10 and sell hot dogs, to put an observation deck on the top. There's a lot of different things if you talk to different people. So, again, I don't want to bore you too much with the details, but we did do an economic analysis, and if nothing else, it was to update and validate others that have already come before me and done pretty much the same thing. That if you looked at a 20-year project term, how many megawatt hours, 300 or 3,500 megawatt hours is 3.5 million kilowatt hours. Being nervous conservative engineers, that's a 24% capacity factor. We know from the Webb turbine and the time that the Falmouth turbines ran, you probably could do better than that in the low 30%. It's a pretty good wind resource. If you did a general obligation bond at 4%, you looked at energy inflation at 3.5%, general inflation to add the cost of O&M and your incremental costs to look at it over a 20-year term. The plant currently uses, we evaluated a current energy bill. They use about 1.1 million kilowatt hours per year at a retail cost of 15.97 cents is the current rate. We broke down all of those charges to see what would be eligible for a credit. The value of the excess is about 12.86 cents. We looked at future rec values in the near term and in the longer term. The coincidence factor, that would be 100% because of net metering. It used to be that you could only get credit for the electricity that you were using at the time that you used it before they increased the net metering caps from 60 kW up to 2 megawatts with the Green Communities Act that was passed in 2008. O&M, $42.50 per kW. That's a current rate to provide operation and maintenance service on these turbines. And over a 20-year term, you should reasonably expect 70 million kilowatt hours out of those machines. And the cost of the energy at 10 cents is less than you're paying for electricity or your net metering credit, so it has a positive net present value of $5.7 million. It has a net cash flow year over year, over 20 years of 8.9 million, and these present value benefits and costs to come up with a benefit to cost ratio of 2.21, which from an economic perspective isn't bad. That's using an analysis that does the time value of money based on a 20-year loan or a mortgage that you would take out to move that turbine. If you were an investor and you had $3.025 million to put on the table and how much will I get on a return on my investment, it's in the mid to low 20s, like about 22 or 23% return on your investment if you were paying cash for that project, assuming that the turbine was allowed to run unrestricted in its location. There was some sensitivity analysis that Sustainable Energy Advantage had done in 2014, I think, that looked at how much curtailment would impact the financial returns on it, and I think that they came up with about 32%, that any more than 32% of the time in terms of hours per day on average, your project economics would erode to the point where someone would urge you not to do the project for financial reasons.
So bottom line with respect to the finances, in terms of what the benefit the turbine could provide, less the cost of moving, would be,
So, based on the economics of taking a general obligation bond,
Right.
$5.7 million is what the benefit would be.
that would be the plus. After how many years?
That's after 20 years.
Is 20 years a reasonable number to use when the turbine, 20 years is what they originally were available for,
Right,
and we've already had them for 8 years, right?
right. Yeah, so
Is 20 years still reasonable, or should we be talking 12 years?
I think that it's reasonable. It's like taking out a 30-year mortgage versus a 20-year. If your objective is to pay off your principal and your interest faster, you would take out a shorter mortgage. And your cost, you have to look at those year-over-year costs or month-over-month costs. And we analyze everything on a calendar year.
I'm talking about the lifetime of the,
Yeah.
not the loan, the lifetime of the turbine.
The asset, so the turbines have a minimum 20-year design life, but they'll often last a little longer than that, and 25 to 30 isn't unreasonable. If it's been if it hasn't been used heavily, meaning that it's been curtailed, or all they're doing is maintaining it where it's standing, it probably has more life than not.
Well, we were being told when we went through the whole process that the using it less actually shortened the lifetime of it.
So,
And so I guess I'm a little concerned now we're hearing, no, actually curtailing it lengthens the lifetime of it. It's-
right, so again, it's like any other mechanical machine, and that, if a turbine was sitting and it was on the ground to where they were manually rotating the bearings to keep from flat spots developing in those, then it probably would have a shorter life for that reason. Because it's up and it's being mechanically moved, it's in a state of what they call freewheeling. I think where if you stopped and look at it, it's not spinning from the wind blowing, but it might be moving slowly in a counterclockwise. That's just so that you're doing the minimum amount to lubricate everything and keep the systems, go. It's like a boat. If the boat that doesn't get run tends to erode pretty quickly, but if you run it and go out and keep it moving, keep the fuel fresh in it, the oils, the lubrications, then it will last a lot longer.
Questions?
No, it's a pretty good report.
Madam Chair, I should just
Please.
interject that as a part of exercising stewardship over these large and complex machines, we have had the manufacturer do periodic annual maintenance even during the shutdown. So I know what Selectman Jones has referred to. We did have some concerns about the curtailing and the impact that might have on a machine that was arguably designed to run 24/7, like the Webb or the Notice turbine has been doing for the last 4 to 5 years without significant problems. But that had been our maintenance message to Vestas, the manufacturer, who we've been working with in terms of taking those issues into account and maintaining them as a productive asset. So I just wanted to underscore that we have been doing that as well.
Doug?
Can I go back to the flicker question?
Sure.
That bow tie shape that you had? Is it reasonable to assume, just on a rough basis, that you could take that same bow tie shape on the bottom turbine and move it to AL1, and you're gonna get pretty close to the same distances? And in my estimate of drawing it in, you may hit 2 of the businesses, but nothing of residential gets hit by it. And
Right.
even the residents, even the businesses, it's in the, maybe the green area or the, not the yellow, but either the green or the red area that does get affected by it. But you can really put that bow tie right on and say, yeah, we're fairly certain as to what the
Yeah.
effect, the flicker effect's gonna be up there.
Yes, and again, it is based on topography. Like if you put that higher,
Right.
the shadows would get longer. So if you're going at a lower elevation, I'm pretty confident, having done a lot of the modeling before, that it would be this or less.
Right.
And it likely wouldn't extend past Route 28.
Because in my trying to just move it up there, it's not even anywhere close to Route 28.
Right.
But maybe I'm misjudging the distances.
No, you're not. You're correct.
Other questions from members of the board?
When you say in your report that it would meet zoning guidelines, that's the Falmouth zoning guidelines, current?
So there's the section on permitting, we touched on this. Local permitting, so section 240-166D provides that wind energy systems lawfully in existence as of the effective date of this article, which was adopted in 2013, shall be considered conforming and may apply for a special permit under this article to relocate. And so that's our opinion and that's our interpretation of your bylaw. Is that a special permit application, and again, it's a discretionary permit. We could go to the planning board like we did the ZBA, and if in their discretion they said that they wouldn't issue a permit, then you couldn't build it theoretically in this alternate location.
So, I just want to take a look at sort of the numbers in general. So if you had that 5 million plus number that we just looked at for Wind 2.
That's net. That's after you've paid for it.
Right, but that, so for Wind 1, you have the dismantling at around 3 million. Is that correct?
That's the dismantling and reconstruction to get it back up and serviceable again.
That's Wind 2.
In its new location.
Okay.
That 3 million is Wind 2.
So,
Oh, I see, okay.
yeah,
that
and
table.
I would direct it at page 6.7 of the report, table 14, and I apologize for all of these tables, but it's hard to get all of these numbers presented in a way that makes sense. And these year over year, so table 12 are the project benefits year over year, table 13 are the project costs, and then 14 nets those two, so you can see what the total revenue minus the annual cost gives you the net cash flow. And it kind of starts at around $627,000 in revenue from net metering credits to your own bill for the energy that wouldn't be purchased to run the wastewater plant, and then the sale of RECs. And then the costs are mostly principal and interest payments, O&M and administrative costs of insuring. The turbine would be about $332,000 per year to net just under $300,000 for the first year. And then those go up again, escalated and indexed to a 3.5% rise in electricity. And me being a nervous conservative engineer, I'm always skeptical. I ratcheted that down and I did the modeling just to prove to myself if energy didn't escalate at 3.5%, but only 0.5%, the project is still very positive in terms of that benefit to cost ratio that we try to zero in on. And anything with a benefit to cost ratio of 1.0 something, 1.0 is break even, meaning that you would get nothing for it for all of your troubles. If it was less than 1, then financially I call it a donkey, you wouldn't want to ride that donkey. But at 2.21, it's substantially positive. And the sensitivity analysis in table 11 says that even if we said that energy is only going to rise in value that it produces, because that's the commodity that you're making is electricity. If it only rose at 0.5%, it would still be 1.78 cost to benefit ratio, which is substantially positive from our view, from the projects that we've looked at. And of those 22 studies that I've done across the state, there have been plenty that have been like 1.04, and it just didn't have the merits, to move forward with it if money was important, which in a lot of towns that are cash strapped, money is important, right?
Well, I guess, I'm sorry.
Please.
So what my question was, and I see from the back that that this project, you didn't include anything about Win 1, sort of the long-term, if it's, what we do with it. So I just wanted to make the point that I know we don't have, since we didn't include that, we don't have the exact numbers, but that $5 million number, while that is very positive, that doesn't include the costs that the town incurs regarding Win 1.
That's right.
So at the end of the day, if it's, maybe not 3 million, because we wouldn't be taking it down and re-erecting it necessarily, but if it's either a wash, which sounds like the best case scenario, or some amount of money to dismantle it, that profit from that 5 million is diminished somewhat. So I just wanted to make sure the 5 million strictly is dealing with Win 2 and doesn't.
It is,
Okay.
right, very, very specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
The second point to make is if we relocate Wind 2, the likelihood that our $5 million grant stays as a grant is very high, as opposed to turning into a loan that we have to repay. And so there's also that additional $5 million that does enter into the calculation as to what do we do with Wind 2.
Right.
This first presentation, there's a lot of material, was only released to the public today. When the Board of Selectmen has really huge concerns in terms of all of the projects that Falmouth has on its plate going forward. Fire stations, we just had Bob talk about recreation, we're looking at fields, we're looking at water. There's just infrastructure maintenance for town buildings, town roads, climate change issues with potentially moving all of those infrastructures. So, this is a very propitious question that's going to take some time to, review. There are other alternatives. This is kind of a little bit of a broad stroke of the issue, but we wanted to have an opportunity for the public to review it. We want to certainly have an opportunity for particularly planning to take a look, and other interested boards, energy folks, and just time for the Board of Selectmen to digest at least this, this first stroke of information and possibilities. I do want to open this time out to some questions from the audience. We are also going to certainly ask for any kind of written email questions from members of the public. We won't necessarily have answers for you today, but everything will be considered. I wonder if, is Mark Cool? Oh, there. Mark, you had sent some correspondence. Would you mind just starting just kind of a quick overview of the question you raised, or do you want to leave it with your correspondence? Thank you.
Mark Cool, Precinct 6, and thank you for a good presentation.
Oh, may I interrupt just for a second?
Yes.
I know I said it at the beginning, but I want to remind everyone, we'll go for 10 minutes, no more than 2 each.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark.
I'll make it brief, but first I want to say, go Clippers and go Sox. So, bottom line, after listening to this and realizing, Steve, through you, Madam Chairman, question to Steve, permitting. I think the elephant in the room is the uncertainty about, Steve had mentioned 240-166D, the exception provision. I think there's going to be a lot of pushback, and that is ground in the fact that there's an uncertainty as to zoning classification, whether the structure is considered a non-complying structure, a non-conforming structure, and obviously it's not a conforming structure, but so it's one of those two. My complaint and the eventual removal of Win 1, or the decree for the removal, from the building commissioner said that Win 1 was without a special permits, thus it was non-complying. The building commissioner was silent in the response to Mr. Funfar with regard to Win 2. But I gave you my correspondence just to draw your concern that is the biggest elephant in the room before the town expends time, effort, and money to researching and examining and exploring relocation ideas. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you. As I said, we won't necessarily have answers specifically, but I thought, having read, and as I'm sure some of the other board members did, all the board members as well, that's something I just wanted everyone to hear, with respect to that being an important issue. Please? Hold on, one at a time. Well, Dave, if you could just wait a second. I know you had your hand up. You'll be right after him. He was quick on the draw. You'll be right after. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Ron Swag, Precinct 1, town meeting member. I noticed in Friday's paper, October 12th, there was a headline saying, lawsuit keeps development on hold. And I know you're aware that there's a lawsuit or an argument before the state Massachusetts Appeals Court to essentially question and may possibly overturn the Barnstable Superior Court decision by one judge to for the town not to operate the turbines. That decision came after a jury trial. That was in June of 2017. There was a jury trial concerning whether the turbines created a nuisance, and where a jury verdict came back saying that they weren't a nuisance. Not one juror was convinced that the turbines, either of them, or especially Wind 1, caused any nuisance at all. So the appeals court was also quite interested in the 2007 legislation concerning the town's approvals by the state legislature to put up the turbines and operate them, notwithstanding. One more point. We all may recall that on May 21st, 2013, there was a townwide vote concerning financing removal of the turbines. That question was voted down, not to finance, by a 2/3 majority, and even 54% no in Precinct 6 where the turbines exist. So I think that right now we're spending money. I presume we're paying this gentleman or his company, and even though the town has voted not to finance removal, and this is probably a prelude to that process. So I just want to say that we need to keep in mind that a decision will be coming. We don't know when. We don't know what it will be from the appeals court, and that it may very well change the situation we're in.
Thank you very much. Dave? You're next, and then, welcome.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Dave Moriarty, lifelong resident of Falmouth. And I just have a few questions for you, Madam Chair, for the engineer.
We won't necessarily have the engineer answer the questions, but please ask, and at some point we'll get the answers. I don't know if they're available today.
There's a few things in this report that were mistakenly left out, I'm sure. Blade replacement. If one blade's damaged, you have to replace all three. It's $1 million per blade. The bearings in the Webb turbines have just been replaced. Our turbines are the same exact year, same exact model, almost as much use. So we didn't mention about the bearing replacements in the blade replacement. And this is just my opinion, it's just a loser, okay? There's no way this town can afford to move Wind 2 and keep a straight face and face the citizens of Falmouth. It's just not economically feasibly possible. We need to admit our mistakes so we can move on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You next. Welcome.
Hi, Catherine Elder, Precinct 6. I am overwhelmed with the idea of moving Wind 2 to a location that's still so close to all of the impacted neighbors after everything that we've been through and over 8 years of litigation, and it just blows my mind. There will be many questions that I will be happy to share with you once I can see the report. Is that available to us now on the website?
It's online, I believe,
Town
Mr.
website, yes.
Town website.
Okay.
Part of the board packet that was posted this morning.
Just a couple comments. I heard Mr. Weehee say there were an infinite number of locations, but I saw only one being considered here. And I just don't understand why other locations weren't considered. If it's appropriate here, why is it not appropriate elsewhere in Falmouth? In fact, if any citizens like the Green Center would like to get a petition going to put it in their neighborhoods, I think that might be an excellent solution. Another thing that comes to mind is that I saw a $3 million price tag to move the turbine. There was an option during the WTOP study to replace the turbines with solar, and it was somewhere just over $2 million. I think you remember that, Doug. I don't understand why that is not an option here, because if we're going to put a lot of money like that into an a renewable energy project, maybe town meeting, I certainly as a citizen would like to see it be a solar project with no negative impacts on our neighborhoods, no worries about a crane or the service warranty with these machines with all these incredibly large moving parts. Just from a feasibility standpoint, I think I would like to see our finance committee take a look at that as a potential option to moving it. It just doesn't make sense to me to throw this kind of good money after bad. And that's not even to mention that nowhere else in town can we have anything more than a 250, I believe it is, kilowatt machine. Why is it still appropriate to be putting this thing that's like way too large?
Sir, last comment. I think we're at the 10 minutes. Am I wrong?
Yeah.
Thank you. This is 10 minutes.
Okay, so this will be the 10 minutes. We'll receive other comments by email or in writing, and this will certainly not be the last discussion. Sir?
My name is John Tudor, Precinct 8. You can see from the color of my shirt, I've been for the turbines all along. Number one, I'm very impressed with the report. Saw charts and maps that I've never seen before. I don't know if they've ever been considered in the discussions we've had the past 8 years. But I'm very pleased to see that the selectmen are continuing to look at alternatives and options. I think the question I have is, did the Board of Selectmen or the Town Council or Judge Morris consider the original agreement, which contract and grant, that promised that there would be no local restrictions, would not be applied? Finally, the objections to it have said it's going to cost a lot, but all of the numbers we've seen up here are numbers in the black. The numbers they're talking about, we're just cutting it and paying back the grant, are all in red.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Well, as I said, we're end of the allotted time, and we'll accept additional comments in writing, and there will be other opportunities and follow-up. Next item on the agenda are minutes of meetings. Public session, August 20, 2018.
I would move approval.
I have one added on page 7 otherwise I'd be happy to second that. If you're looking at the bottom of the page under comments that I made, Mr. Patterson, the 1, 2, 3, 4th line, it says attended Ocean Pond Environmental Trust. That should be Oyster Pond.
Okay? Right.
And I seconded otherwise, as edited.
So with that change, is there a second?
He was the second.
Oh, sorry. Got it. All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have individual selectmen's reports. Doug?
So I got to, last week, attend the Coffee with the Cop, which is always a nice event and a relaxed atmosphere where the police are just interacting casually with the public, so that was enjoyable. I saw Mr. Suso there, as always. Had that meeting with Senator Vinnie DiMacedo regarding his upcoming meeting with Lauren Liss, who is the head of Mass Development. And so we imparted our concerns. We asked him to really push for the continued effort to fund that $25 million repair to the state pier. But we also asked that also would be included, would be the option for at least temporary freight service through there until we further ask for more support of the north terminal. And the cost estimates now for the north terminal are becoming more streamlined, and they're coming up with ideas that the reuse of some dredging materials from cleanup, they've already removed enough of the contaminated material that they're down to clean material that's still being excavated. So they're gonna be stockpiling dredge material. Bottom line is that the bulkhead construction would only be now $20 million, and the dredging $15 million. So that North Terminal project is more and more realistic, and it's already fully permitted. So we followed up our meeting with Senator DiMacedo with a letter to him to highlight and outline our concerns for not only the volume of freight traffic doubling every 18 to 20 years, which if you look at the historic graph, it's pretty consistent. And if it continues to double at that rate, we're headed for a real logjam down here. So we put all that stuff to paper, and Senator DiMacedo is meeting with Lauren Liss on October 17th regarding another matter, but he's pretty sure that he can fit this conversation in.
I wouldn't say we're headed toward logjam, I think we're already at logjam.
Well, we're gonna be double logjam. So that was a pretty productive and good meeting. I also got to enjoy a nice dinner at the Oceanographic, again with Mr. Suso and Sue. That was very nice to meet those people. We were the first to be invited, other than corporation and, WHOI members, so that was a nice occasion. And this week I went to the Veterans Council meeting, and it's a hardworking group, and they're gonna be ready for another great Veterans Day. They were finalizing their plans and assignments. So that's it for me this week.
Great, Sam?
I actually am now sitting on the Falmouth High School Multi-Purpose Field Advisory Committee, which met on October 5th. And there is a little bit of a hitch in that project going through. The RFP that was generated by a consultant doesn't quite meet the state regulations, and so it's being reissued for bidders to respond to. It's not likely that it's going to affect the schedule of completion, which is good news. And so that's where we are at this point. So I'll continue to keep you updated as we meet. There's another meeting planned, so hopefully next time I'll have something else to report to you. Been to the Concom meeting. I also attended the Steamship Authority Terminal Design public meeting that Julian mentioned in his report, and heard all of the feedback. I was actually personally surprised in looking at the newspaper. If you look on the first page, second page, and the third page, on the third page there is a boathouse with a dock next to it, and the lines and colors of that historic boathouse and dock actually pretty closely match the proposed design. And I thought, wow, it actually is kind of reflective of a view you might have here on Cape Cod. But I know that people in Woods Hole are very much concerned about blocking views of the harbor and other areas, so there's not unanimity and support for that particular design. A lot of questions, but it was, I hope, a useful meeting for the Steamship Authority in evaluating their design. Attended the Cape Cod Commission's Regional Planning Policy draft presentation. This is an update, and we had a brief version of that at the Cape Cod Selectmen and Councilors Association meeting this past Friday, and that is out for comment from everybody. And I think that actually it's a useful document for us to look at in terms of our own planning of land use and our comprehensive plan, just to have something to reflect and say, have we considered these things in our planning? So it's available. It's something the Cape Cod Commission has been working on, so this is a revision. So I think we should make sure we use it as a tool, particularly in the area of the planning department. I also attended the ZBA hearing this past Thursday, where they heard the application for the comprehensive permit for the 587 Gifford Street, 10 of the 20 units they're proposing to put on that site. And essentially they were favorably inclined and voted to approve it. They have to go ahead and draft their findings and conditions, so it's continued on everybody agreeing on that. But at least that appears to be supported by the Zoning Board of Appeals. They like the site, and some of the changes that were proposed for sight lines as you enter and leave that proposed development have been included in the design as proposed by our town engineer. So it seems like a project that's coalescing and has the support of the ZBA. And then Last thing was, I got invited to attend the Charter Review Committee meeting this afternoon and did that, and we had an interesting dialogue about various aspects of the charter, and that'll be thrown into the mix of what they consider and what they finally propose. That's it.
Great. Megan?
Just briefly, I had a Bikeways committee meeting. Actually, Doug attended, and Doug had invited some folks to sort of give some public comment about the Route 28 project, widening project, which it was a very positive dialogue. I think in the past there has been, I think, sort of a lack of communication or misunderstanding about really a lot of the commonalities that folks share, both individuals on bikeways and a lot of the individuals who live in the parts of town that are going to be affected by that project. So it was a very positive discussion. And also attended affirmative action, and I just want to pull it up so I make sure I say this correctly. So the Affirmative Action Committee really is trying to sort of be more out there, more engaged, and one of the things that they're going to do is we're going to do a free film screening of a movie called The Color of Fear. It's a great documentary. It's from the 90s, but it's incredibly relevant to issues around race, identity, sort of implicit bias. And we're going to do that on November 15th at 6:30 at the Falmouth Housing Authority, 115 Scranton Ave, which is obviously next to Windfall, and it's going to be in the Harborview Community Room. So I'll provide that information again, but everybody's November gets really full. But it's going to be a screening, and it's free, and there'll be some sort of guided dialogue after that. So very exciting. Affirmative Action has taken a long time to get to a place where they can do some of these community events. Lastly, Solid Waste Advisory spent a good deal of time looking at Malcolm Donald's petitioner's article around the styrofoam, gave some really helpful input. Doug was there as well, some really helpful input around making that. Scott McGann was there as well from Health Department. So some really helpful comments to streamline that article, address some of the concerns that this board brought when we sort of spoke on that article. And so I think they're going to review it again, and Health Department will take a look at it again. So just a nice collaboration around that, what is an important issue pertaining to sort of recycling and waste in our community and just being a greener community. And I think that's it. Yeah.
Great. Doug?
I ran into Sue at the event for the Falmouth Fund last week, in which they celebrated for the local organizations and doing great things in town. The Saltpond Bird Sanctuary, Museums on the Green, VIPS, and the Service Center, all who received some funding from the Falmouth Fund. They've just increased their endowment by over $100,000 this year and are off to a really great start, and just another sign of the philanthropy of the town of Falmouth.
Amazing. Mr. Suso, Town Manager's Report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Just a reminder, a week from tonight at 7 p.m., we have a scheduled joint meeting with the Finance Committee, and we're finalizing the agenda on that going forward. So we certainly look forward to that joint meeting opportunity. Also, just a general reminder of the dedication ceremony for the water filtration plant, 5 o'clock in the afternoon tomorrow at the 650 Gifford Street facility, and we look forward to the public joining us for that ceremony, which the Selectmen will be hosting. And also a second reminder on the follow-up public meeting, which
on the widening?
yeah, on the Route 25, excuse me, Route
28, on the
28,
25th.
pardon me.
Too many numbers.
Yeah, too many numbers. It will be held on Thursday, October 25th for Main Street T-Ticket, a widening and reconstruction proposal, and that will be from 6 to 7:30 p.m.
Herman
at
Room?
the Herman Room in the main library. So we will look forward to that, and we'll welcome all interested residents in attending, and we will have Public Works represented as well as representative of the design consultant. So we look forward to that additional input, and that is, we want to hold that meeting obviously before November town meeting and before what's been talked about as the 25% design plans. Those are not yet completed, so we want to afford this opportunity for additional public input on behalf of the Board of Selectmen, and we look forward to that. Which concludes my report. Thank
Could
you.
I just speak to that for
Please.
just one moment? I just wanted to, and Peter was here, Peter McConerty was here earlier tonight, but I just want to give a huge thanks to him. He came to that Bikeways committee meeting, and really, he can speak, unlike, it's nothing against Doug, Doug knows a lot, but, I mean, he can speak with authority and facts much more than Doug and I can about sort of that process.
Absolutely.
And it was incredibly helpful for everyone to hear about where the process was at. I think there was a misconception that it was kind of a done deal. And so he explained that sort of that 25% completion marker, what that means, and that we're not there yet, and that there's time for input. So just, again, an example of town employees who, you know, this isn't a committee he has to come to. He came and he really brought a lot of information and just was very helpful in steering the conversation in a way that was positive and, you know, kind of result-oriented instead of just everyone getting there and being frustrated. So great work by Peter, as usual, so.
Awesome. Mr. Johnson-Staub.
Two things. I attended, pretty much on the board's behalf, the first meeting of the Shellfish Advisory Committee, which was Tuesday, October 2nd. Great group of folks. We had a lively discussion right out of the gate, so I would say that we still have some consensus building to do between the commercial wild harvest shellfishermen and the aquaculture, the plans to increase the amount of aquaculture licensing that we're doing in our waters. But again, a good group of people, and look forward to continuing to work with them and the Shellfish Constable. And secondly, we opened the filed sub-bids for the new senior center construction. So I know the board's probably familiar, but for the audience at home, under the state procurement law for a large building project like this, it's a two-stage bid opening process where you open some of the trades, their pricing first, and then those prices are given to the general contractors who later issue final bids. And that bid opening has moved back just a little bit based on feedback from the general contractors. So that big reveal will be on October 25th.
And it was going to be, it's just a difference of 3 days. Was it going to be the 22nd?
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. Yep.
Great, that's great process.
Oh, I left out one important detail. The filed sub-bids came in right on estimate, so it was good news.
Great.
That's wonderful.
Excellent. Yeah.
Really good news.
On that note, I move
Yeah.
to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you, everyone.
All those in favor?
All those in favor? Yes,
Aye.
adjourn.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pat Thatcher.
And I'm Margaret Gifford, and we're from Sotheby's International Realty.
And you know, Margaret, I think the word that best describes this real estate market this year is opportunistic.
I think that's a great word to describe what the real estate market's doing now.
I think it is also. And that says if you're a seller, by golly, get your house ready correctly.
And if you're a buyer, do your homework.
So if you want to be part of this opportunistic real estate market, jump
on that horse.
Carlson Printing for all your printing needs. 508-548-7303 or toll free at 1-800-696-7303. Our email address is carlsonprinting@aol.com. Carlson Printing for all your printing needs.
Hosting services for fctv.org are provided by MegaNet Communications. MegaNet offers a wide array of internet services, including Mega Backup Cloud Service, server colocation, T1, fiber, Metro Ethernet, as well as telephone services such as hosted PBX and digital voice. Their number one goal is to keep your communications network up and running and allow you to focus on growing your business. 877-634-2638 or meganet.net.